The story begins with the main character's mother on a carriage, arriving at her home. After the woman got out of the carriage, she immediately shouted to her daughter to come out immediately. But her shouts were not heard, for the girl was sleeping peacefully on the windowsill. So the woman shouted to see if the girl could hear her. The heroine heard nothing until the woman shouted her name, Melody. That's when she immediately woke up and realized that someone was addressing her. After that, the things that the main character's mom had bought were dragged into her house. The girl saw them, and there were literally countless of them. The mom stated to Melody to just look at it. It turns out that as she was returning from the auction, there she came across a carriage filled with all of it. So it turns out that today is Mommy's lucky day. And all this is only because it's probably all the stuff of the capital's aristocrats too. Behind all this mountain of things, the protagonist saw a girl who was sitting on a chair. Her mom noticed that her daughter was kind of shocked and asked what was wrong with Melody's face. At that, she wondered if she was not happy about it. The protagonist, in turn, thought that this was probably the most hopeless and the end. It turns out that she was trapped in the novella in the body of the merchant's daughter during her 11th spring. So it turns out that the first chapter of this novella, which she'd rather not see, starts right after she meets this girl who is now sitting in their house. The woman heads upstairs and declares to her daughter that she can sell it all, buy some fabric, and order herself a new dress. Also, if she liked something, she would let her put that item up. And she inquired as to such an offer. The girl immediately inquired if her mother thought it was dangerous enough to leave things from the capital's aristocrats. The woman declared that she bet those nobles had mountains to the ceiling of those things everywhere. But Melody noticed that they were definitely looking for their daughter. The woman looked at her and stated that there was no way to know that for sure. After that, she smiled and added the pinwheeled hundredfolds, only know how to reproduce. Still, they probably have so many children that they won't even remember all of them. So it turns out that, in any case, she's going to leave the girl in this room, so stop talking nonsense. The daughter had no choice but to agree to it. This very moment, she reflected that when she was 5 years old, she started remembering her past life. At that very time, the girl thought she had a terrible dream, so she went up to her mother, stated that she had a terrible dream. At first, she didn't realize that it wasn't just a dream and she was scared. So upon waking up, she cried for a very long time. She was completely alone in this world where no one smiles. In fact, when the daughter approached her mother, she pushed her away and remarked that she did not know what was wrong with her, but she was busy, and the girl annoyed her. Fortunately, little by little, the heroine still adapted to such a life. All this is thanks to the fact that she realized that her dreams were actually memories of her past life. After a while, when she turned 10, the memories that popped up in her head in fragments began to build up into a whole picture. Literally every night, the heroine revisited her memories as if she were reading a novel. She was a simple girl of 15, and yet she was not an adult. She was a child in a family that had a lot of money problems. In her memories, she only looked up to other peers and adults. Perhaps that's why her gaze was always on her old shoes. The little girl just wanted very badly for someone to be there for her while comforting her. She always felt lonely because no one was around at all, and it was very much unbearable for her. However, there was always one joyful girl in her memories, and she read like a book. The heroine, as a matter of course, realized that that girl liked to read very much. It was another story called The Duke Had 3 Sons and 1 Daughter. Then the same girl then thought, was it weak to give him a not-so-trivial title? That very story begins with a crisis and ends with a beautiful finale. The heroine quickly fell in love with the whole story. Therefore, she had the same feelings that her past life. The girl thought that really all the main characters are very good. The main character's childhood filled her especially well. When she was only 5 years old, she lost her mom to an accident. The dishonest peddler and her daughter become the first villains to appear in the story. They are the ones who kidnapped and kept the little protagonist locked up. These villains played a very important role in Loretta's life. They aroused the reader's hatred towards them and also the love of the protagonist. It turns out that at the end of the very first chapter, they were sentenced to death, thanks to the great Duke from the capital. It didn't take much time to read this story. When the heroine got to this world, U.S. newspapers saw in one news and thought, how can everything be one and the same? It turns out that the beginning, the novel, which she liked to read so much, coincided with written in the news in the newspaper. The name of the place, the family name, and even her first name. The daughter of slave traders, who tormented the protagonist, was caught by the Duke, and her name was Melody. This is why the protagonist was belittling her mother to keep them out of the business. The woman asked her what she was saying. Still, she does not want to hear anything else about it, because with this, they will make a lot of money. But the daughter tearfully continued to plead that if they got involved with the slave trade, they would be in very big trouble. The mother stated that she was really very noisy, and if she was going to continue like this, then let her just leave her house. Just then, the protagonist thought that although she could not convince her mother to give up this most horrible idea, then she still has a way to save herself in this situation. The girl thought that she could avoid death by becoming a friend to the protagonist of this novel. At first glance, this does not look like something difficult, but the problem remains nevertheless. At that moment, a woman came to her and approached Melody. In doing so, she stated that didn't she tell the girl to just not let this little girl die? Also noting that she had brought her to a better place, it would have been much worse in another. She also wanted to state something else, but then turned around and remarked for her to forget everything. Still, this girl should be grateful at least for giving her at least a blanket. She and the heroine at this point looked at the frightened girl who was wrapped in the blanket, and she felt very sad about the whole thing. At this, she apologized to the girl and stated that she saw the pendant with her name written on it. She stated that it said Loretta and asked if it was true that it was her name. Her interlocutor answered her nothing and only made some strange sound and then hid under the blanket. The heroine thought that she was probably too scared, and she was definitely done for the day. After that, Melody placed a tray of food on the ground for you. While doing so, stated to the girl that she was putting this soup here so she wanted her to eat. Next, she walked out of the room and hid to watch. In doing so, she thought that the girl definitely needs to eat at least a little bit. After a while, Loretta crawled out from under the blanket and looked at the food that had been left for her. Then, seeing that there was no one in the room, she crawled over to the food and wanted to eat it. The heroine looked at it and thought thank goodness she would eat. What if Loretta noticed her and got scared because of it? The girl at that time thought she had been exposed. Then it turns out that it's still very hard to get close to her. After some time, night came and the protagonist took the girl to her room. Young stated to her that it wouldn't be a big deal if she slept in her bed. It turns out that she will sleep better here than in that hard chair her mother brought her. The girl answered her nothing, and the heroine asked if she was all right. But Loretta did not answer her now, and just walked leisurely to the bed to go to sleep. The heroine thought that her heart just bleeds now. After all, this girl is such a tiny baby, and why did she have to be the one in this situation? Then Melody saw the girl tucked into her bed, tears in her eyes. As she did so, she reached her hand out to her and wanted to ask her if she was okay, but suddenly stopped and thought that, for sure now for Loretta, she is just a villain. The next day, the protagonist brought drinks for herself and for her new friend she wanted to make. She looked at the girl and was a little surprised at what she was seeing. All because Loretta was sitting across from her and not even running away from her or hiding at that. The girl happily thought, was she really starting to trust her? Suddenly, her mother turned to her daughter and told Melody to go to her immediately. The heroine put a glass with a drink on the table and stated that the milk is a little hot, so let the girl blow and only then drink it. After that, she headed towards the exit and asked her mother if she had called for her. After a while, Melody was in the room looking out the window. She could see that it was very cloudy outside and hoped that at least there would be no thunder that day. While she was thinking about it, she heard someone knocking on the door of the room she was in. That's why the girl went to it and opened the door and noticed that Loretta was there. The heroine stated that today she somehow came to her late. The girl, in turn, did not answer her anything and immediately ran up to hug her. Melody was shocked and wondered what had happened to her. After that, the little girl ran to the bed and immediately covered with her head while it was heard that she was crying. The heroine thought that her mother had done something to her. She didn't understand what could have happened, and what she should do at times like this she didn't understand either. After a moment, Melody decided that the cool air would definitely help the girl. That's why she opened the window and told Loretta to take a look. It turns out that the rain and wind had caused all the leaves to fall outside. But at that very moment, the main character noticed how the little girl was very much frightened and began to cry even more. The girl was frightened and asked if she should close the window. The interlocutor did not answer her, and so she closed it and stated that she had done so. Next, the heroine began to think about why Loretta reacted to the open window like that. Suddenly, she remembered her mother's words. The woman, upon arrival, said that she was lucky today because when she was on her way from the auction, she came across an overturned carriage. As a consequence of all this, it rained that day. That is why the girl thinks that Loretta was frightened through these circumstances. Then the protagonist asked the interlocutor if she was very scared. She said that she is very afraid of thunder and lightning and therefore covers her ears with her hands. After all, she doesn't even know what happened in her past life. But she thought that if you warm your ears, you won't be able to hear anything at all. She said it really helps. Loretta was really attracted to it, and she got out of the pajal, but at that moment was crying really hard. The main character walked over to the girl and took her hands. Further stated that this is why let her do as she did. At this point, she took the girl's small hands and leaned them against her ears. After a while, Melody wondered if that was better. Still, in her opinion, it should be less audible now. But Loretta in turn stated that she could still hear everything. The heroine wondered if she really meant it. After that, the girls went to bed together to go to bed already. The heroine turned to Loretta and she asked what she wanted. Melody said that everything would be fine because the first chapter was really short. The companion was surprised to hear what the first chapter was. The heroine at this time thought she had said something wrong. Further stated to the interlocutor that very soon Loretta will be happy. That is why she should not be afraid of anything and just go to sleep quietly. One day, the Duke was in his office and was doing business. At the same time, he considered what documents on suddenly in his room knocked and someone entered. The subordinate immediately turned to him and said that they had not found the person he had instructed to look for. At the same time, he stated that the area in which they had found this one was quite secluded. The Duke immediately stood up and left all his business for later. He also threw on his outer clothes and stated to his subordinates to get the horses ready. All this because he was leaving there right now. The next day, Loretta sat and drew her drawing. After she finished, she showed it to the main character. She drew Melody with her and signed the drawing with her name. The main character immediately smiled after looking at it and happily said that it was just beautiful. Then she said of her new friend that for this drawing he would give her a bun. The little girl was delighted and only laughed, then stated that Loretta is really so happy around Melody. After that, the heroine turned to her and noticed that they still need to learn letters and then play. The interlocutor agreed happily to this and stated that Loretta would be a sister. The girl immediately wondered if the little girl wanted her to be younger than her. At that, Melody thought that she needed to figure out what was bothering the girl. She further asked her who would be the mom then. She was surprised to ask if she was going to be the mom because Loretta didn't know all that much about it. And the protagonist was surprised to ask what she meant. At that, she thought that it had never been mentioned that Loretta had lost her memories of her mom. Suddenly, the girl turned to Melody and wondered about counting the letters at the bottom of the picture. The little girl remarked that she would look now and stated that it read like a house. The little girl excitedly stated that it was such a beautiful house. Melody remarked that it really was, as it was a great place to hide. She further added with a smile that Loretta would be returning to her beautiful home soon after all. The little girl wondered in amazement if she would really be coming home. The heroine remarked that it was so to the very place where the girl used to live. Loretta inquired whether her interlocutor would go with her. The protagonist did not expect to hear this question and tensed up a bit, then hesitated and said that she was already home. The girl asked in surprise what she meant. Further, her eyes began to brim with tears, and she asked if Melody and Loretta would break up. At this, the heroine thought that of course she was the daughter of the villain, therefore stated to the little girl that they have different homes and this really happens. Loretta immediately got up and started crying. At this, she stated that if Melody was not there, then who would cover her ears in that very creepy carriage? The girl immediately asked what other carriage and asked her to stop crying. The child's cries were heard by her mother, and she immediately rushed into their room. At the same time, she asked her daughter if she could not shut her mouth. It turns out that the girl has already grown big, and you can do nothing and only eat her. Next, she switched to the little girl and stated that she would be sorry if she made any more noise. Immediately after she yelled at them, she turned around and started walking away. At the same time, she said that there is not a day of peace in this very house. The protagonist only looked at her mother and said nothing to her. Then she turned her gaze to the girl and asked Loretta if she was all right. The little girl remarked that if Loretta and Melody had different homes, she didn't want to be there at all. The heroine, hearing this, only hugged the girl because she was sad and could not do anything. After this, a little time passed and it was already early fall. A woman burst into the room where the girls were and turned to Melody. To her, she stated that Mommy had just come with some wonderful news. She further pointed her hand at the baby girl and stated that this girl was very, very lucky. Loretta wondered if she was really lucky. The woman at the top of her voice laughed and declared of the girl that she was a bag of money. Though not even that, for she is just a bag of gold coins. Then she told her daughter to be much more careful. That's because if this girl catches a cold, they'll refuse to take her. The little girl heard the whole conversation and wondered what else they would refuse to take her away. At that time, the mother asked her daughter why she did not answer her. She wondered if she had completely dumbed down lately. Melody, in turn, poured hot food on her plate, further stated to her mother that she was not deaf. The woman was infuriated by this and wondered if the girl had forgotten who she was talking to. After that, she approached her and said how dare she speak to her like that. At the same time, she grabbed her shoulder to turn her to her side, but suddenly the girl touched a bowl of hot food and knocked it over. As it happened, the hot food spilled and made a burn on the girl's leg. Loretta noticed this and immediately inquired if Melody was okay. Next, she tried to approach her, and the heroine stated for the little girl to be much more careful. At that very moment, Loretta slipped on the hot food and immediately fell. The heroine was frightened and immediately ran up to the girl. There was a clearly visible wound on her leg. Melody was shocked and stated that her knees were all bloody. The mother, who was in the room, saw the whole situation. At this, she stated about her daughter that how stupid she was after all. Then she asked why she was sitting there because she should go and call a doctor immediately. After all, it turns out that if this little girl has scars, she will tear her to pieces. The main character immediately began to run to call the doctor because he lives far away. Outside at the same time, it was still pouring rain and it was very cold. But Melody continued to run desperately to call the doctor. As she did so, thoughts crossed her head wondering if Loretta's mom hadn't scolded her. Also thought that if she was left with a scar and hurt severe, could she be punished for it if she got in trouble in the future? The girl kept running to the water, suddenly caught her sore foot on a rock and immediately fell. It turns out she was on wet, damp ground and the rain kept pouring down. Melody started to get up slowly and thought that if only she hadn't let the little girl so close to her, it wouldn't have been like this. It turns out it would have been very glorious if her evil mother hadn't responded to her. Now the main character's head was visited by thoughts that all this happened only because of her. That's why she sat on her knees for a while looking only up and thinking about the whole situation. But after a while she got up on her feet, soiled and wounded. All this because she thought there was no time at all. After all, that girl should by no means let Loretta be unhappy. The heroine looked ahead and thought that on this road she could very quickly get to the house of Miss Marlena, but it turns out that she must hurry after all. At this very time, the Duke's carriage was passing along the road that was close by. The manager of the carriage heard the Duke doing something and asked him what was wrong. He remarked to him that he thought he saw a kid on the path. The guy smiled because of this and wondered if anyone could be walking in such a downpour. He also added that the truth was being told after all, at that she tried, that in this forest only what will not show itself. At the same time, he told the Duke that they had not long left on the road, and it would not be long before they reached that very house. The man continued to stare in the direction where he had glimpsed the silhouette of a child. At the same time, the doctor to whom the protagonist was going was sitting by candlelight and writing something down. But suddenly, the woman heard someone knocking at her house at this late hour. Thereupon, Miss Merlin immediately rose and went with her candle to the door. As she did so, she inquired who was there behind the door. The heroine noticed that it was Melody who had come to see her. Literally immediately, the doctor opened the door and looked to see who was there. The picture she saw horrified her because the girl was all wet and dirty, and it was obvious from her that she was very badly wounded. Miss Merlin at once took the girl into the house and began to examine her. In doing so, she treated her wounds and asked the girl to sit still a little longer. After a while, the heroine declared that she was indeed fine, but the woman realized that this was not the case at all and declared her so. The woman then remarked that she had also told her mother that if she got drunk again and ran away her child, she would have to deal with law enforcement. Melody turned to the miss at this time and asked if she could hurry up and go with her to her house. She further stated that it was because the person who needed help lived in her house. She, in turn, had just hurt herself when she fell on the way to her house. Miss Merlin inquired if she was really talking about the girl who brought her mother home. The heroine declared that she was indeed. The woman was immediately wary and thought that if the girl cared for the child, they might think she was involved in the slave trade and seriously punish her. That being said, she thought that she was very worried about it. The protagonist kept saying that it was all her fault that all this happened. It turns out that Loretta only hurt herself because she knocked over the bowl. Suddenly, she said that she would be back soon. It was because she was going on horseback, and she would stay here and shelter herself very well. The girl immediately remarked that this should not be done, because it will be very scary in the river without her, and she is afraid of heavy rain. It turns out that she definitely needed the girl. The woman had nothing left to do but to take the main character with her. And so, after a while, they were heading to the place of residence of the girl on a horse. At one point, Melody stated that they were almost there and only a little bit left. Miss Merlin stated that Melody should behave a little more calmly. Still, if they rushed now, the consequences would pile up. She further looked ahead and stated what it was. The heroine was surprised not to realize what she was now saying and doing. Suddenly, the woman inquired if the girl could see the carriages that were outside her house. Melody stated that she could indeed see them. Miss Merlin went on to say that one of these carriages is a carriage by knights, and the other is the carriage of some aristocrat. She further remarked that her mother must have gotten caught after all. The girl at this time realized what had happened at all, for today was that rainy day in early autumn. And as she remembers from the plot of the short story, she knows today is the day Loretta comes home. Miss Merlin declared that, come to think of it, they should go back to her house now. The girl remarked that she would be in danger after all if she hid it, but the woman indicated for the girl to be much quieter. After all, her mother had committed a crime, and she didn't need to get involved in all of this. The protagonist at this time became very sad, and she thought that only thanks to Miss Merlin she had just escaped a severe punishment. But still, it comes out that her time with Loretta was over. Now, the protagonist saw the girl being led out of the house, and the knights and the duke were beside her. The heroine thought that, after all, Loretta would return to a happy life with her family. In doing so, she will live with good people and also well-to-do people. In the end, the country should be happy for her, but still her heart clenched with pain that she would not see her again. Suddenly, the guards brought out the girl's mother and shouted so much for him to release her immediately. Next, the subordinates asked the duke if they should send her to the central dungeon. The man remarked that that was exactly what should be done. Miss Merlin immediately realized that it was getting dangerous here, and they needed to return home. She further pointed her horse in the direction of the house and stated that it was getting cooler, so they needed to head back. The protagonist only gave one last glance in the direction of home, and she was sad. After that, a small amount of time passed, and the protagonist sat sad at the table. Miss Merlin prepared some food and poured it into a bowl for the girl to eat. While doing so, she stated that she was very glad that the girl was not sick. Further stated that she was very worried about her yesterday because she thought she would faint because of the situation. Suddenly, the heroine heard, as if from behind the window, a friend called out to her by name. Then she looked out the window and thought that it was Loretta calling her. But after a moment, she realized that there was no one there. At that time, Miss Merlin approached the girl and put her hand on her shoulder. While doing so, stated to the girl that she had thought of something. Still, she wanted the girl to stay with her for a while, and asked her why she should not learn medicine instead of her son. The heroine inquired, but could she do that? The woman stated that she remembered Isaiah saying that he wanted to be a knight, and then immediately left after that. It turns out they have the same room, and if the girl stays, it will be easier for her to keep an eye on her. Still, it comes out much better than living alone in that very empty house. The girl immediately thought that the woman's son is bad. He had such a wonderful mother, and he did this to her. Miss Merlin said that if the girl still did not like it, she could not do it. Just then, the heroine interrupted her and stated that she liked it all. At the same time expressed great gratitude for the fact that the woman takes such care of her. The interlocutor noted that she did not need to do this because she is actually a very strict doctor. Next, the protagonist inquired whether the woman would mind only if she thought about it a little. After this conversation, the girl ate and immediately left the house. She then went to her house to see what had happened there. She thought she couldn't find her clothes, and in doing so, her mother probably took all the money when she saw the guards. Also, the heroine thought that her mother was obviously drunk at the time the knights came to her house. It turns out that now of all the crimes, she would definitely be in trouble. Next, she thought about what she should do because of this situation. At that moment, the girl saw a drawing of her friend in front of her eyes. Again, she became very sad, and she thought that she would never see this little girl again. So it turns out that she did not even say goodbye to her normally, and she had to warn her about the dangers in the future. Because of the sadness and sorrow, the protagonist immediately cried very bitterly, while thinking that she was blinded by their happy moments as well, and only hurt the girl. Still, she really wanted to at least hear her voice one more time. After her musings, the girl heard someone walking around the house she was in. In doing so, she heard someone yelling for her to stop. That's why she didn't realize what was going on and immediately turned her head towards the exit. What she saw behind her back at herself shocked her. After all, at that moment, Loretta ran to meet the girl and immediately hugged her tightly. The protagonist did not expect such a turn of events, nor did she expect to see her friend again in this house. The little girl also had tears in her eyes at this moment, and she immediately got up and turned to the girl. She inquired who made Melody cry because Loretta would beat him. The protagonist at this point didn't realize what was even happening now. Loretta then stated for little Melody to stop crying now. After that, she hugged the protagonist tightly. Her neither remained in that position. The girl thought that when Loretta is around, she is very warm in these moments. Next, the girl wondered if it was really her friend. The little girl stated that it is, and indeed Loretta is here. Then the heroine also wanted to ask how she ended up here, but suddenly the cat interrupted her as well. The girl thought that she cried and laughed, and now also the cat. The little girl noticed that something was wrong with her friend and wondered if she was okay. At that very time, another man walked into the room they were in. The heroine noticed that she was fine, but suddenly the man handed her a flask of water and remarked that this water and let her drink it. Also noticed that the girl must be the daughter of the very slave trader. Melody immediately looked at the man and realized that she knew the man. After all, as she remembers from the plot of the novella, he is Loretta's father and a duke in the kingdom of this world. It also turns out that his name is Wayne Baldwin. Further, the man noticed that he thought the hiccups had gone away after all. The protagonist, in turn, immediately rushed to bow to the man and apologize to the duke. The man asked her why she was apologizing. The girl said that she apologized for her mother and for what she had done to his daughter, because she had committed a crime. The man remarked that this was true, and she would receive the punishment she deserved for it. At the same time, stated not to let the girl worry, for he would send someone to her on the day of the trial. The heroine at this time thought that if she had not come home, this trouble would not have happened at all. Afterward, the girl wondered how she would be punished after all. Then the duke asked if it was she who had suggested to her mother that she should go into the slave trade. The girl stated that of course she had not. The man remarked that her mother had said she was just feeding some other girl. The protagonist wanted to say something else but did not have time, for the man continued to speak. He said that it turns out that the trial will be held without publicity, and there will be no guards, but the proceedings will be serious. After that, he noticed that the girl followed him. It turns out that he will take her to the orphanage of the capital temple because it is a good place. It is supported by aristocrats. Melody was shocked and thought that it was probably because she cared for Loretta, but she realized that if she agreed to this, she wouldn't be able to be with her friend anymore. At that moment, the little girl approached the girl. She asked if Loretta and Melody would still have different homes. The heroine immediately went to the girl and addressed her. While doing so, she recalled the moments she had experienced with her friend. She was very sad, and she thought that indeed Melody really loves Loretta very much. Suddenly, the little girl asked her if he loved her. The heroine gently took her friend's hand and stated that of course he did. After all, Melody loves Loretta very much. The girl rejoiced very much and declared that indeed Loretta and Melody loved each other. After that, she turned to the gentleman. To him, she stated that he was so silly and the Duke was just a happy lump. The man was surprised and wondered what else a happy lump meant. At this point, the protagonist explained to him that his mom used to say that a happy lump was a bag of money. The Duke stated that he understood then. Babe at this time started casually saying that yesterday Loretta cried without Melody and she was very scared. It also turns out that Melody was also crying over not being here. She further stated that after all, Melody was just a baby and she was allowed to cry after all. The little girl then turned around and stated that she would go with her. The man who was standing in the room with them and heard the whole thing was a little shocked. At that, he thought that this little one's first requests were to bring the delinquent's daughter to the capital. The little girl rather smirked as she stood and looked at her friend, while thinking that the Duke would definitely not refuse Loretta's request. The Duke in turn stood there and continued to think about the whole situation. He thought that all of this is happening because of this incident that happened yesterday. At the same time, he remembered how the girl had cried and stated that she really wanted to go to Melody and no one could calm her down. After his brief thoughts, the man turned his gaze to the main character and asked what she thought. The girl looked at him with a questioning look and wondered what she was really thinking. As she did so, she looked at her friend and thought that if she studied medicine at Miss Merlin's and became a doctor, who could become a good person, unlike her mother. Still, she was able to get away with it, and it was all because she knew her fate from the novella. It also comes out that she knows the future of this child that is standing in front of her. All the hardships and happy moments that this girl will experience are literally engraved in her memory. And she knows all this because she remembers perfectly the plot, the novella she read. Now the protagonist thought that perhaps she should try to give Loretta a better future. After all, there was something in this world that only she could handle. Immediately after her thoughts, the girl turned to the Duke and declared that she would go with Loretta. Hearing this, the little girl was overjoyed at what her friend had said. Miss Merlin stood on the porch of her house and worriedly waited for the protagonist to appear. Suddenly, she saw the girl running towards her house with great speed. After that, they met again, and the protagonist told the woman about the switch with her. She also told about what would happen to her in the future as she was leaving with the Duke and her new friend to the capital. The woman was packing a little bit of food on the way for the girl. At the same time, she stated that she could not believe that the girl was going to the capital. Still, the Duke was a bit dangerous right now with the whole situation. Okay, some other stooge, but not the Duke. The main character has stated that she knows all of this. That said, she is sure that the majority in the capital is on his side. Miss Merrill stated that she seemed to have already made up her mind. The girl smiled at her and apologized and thanked her for giving her Isaiah's room. The woman stated that she shouldn't have given the lady who was afraid of Isaiah's sweat his room after all. The girl remarked to her that none of that was true, for she was quite comfortable there. Next, the interlocutor stroked the protagonist on the head and put her some more potions. She said that if it would be very hard in the capital, she could always come back to her, because everyone needs a home. The girl headed for the exit, and the woman said that she had a favor to ask of Melody. Still, if she meets her son in the capital, let her not forget to give him a honey cake. After that, the protagonist went out and dodged the woman, bidding her farewell. Immediately afterward, she ran to the loin, in which her friend was waiting for her, as well as the Duke. At last, Miss Merrill wished that little Melody might be blessed by the Lord on her journey. At this very time in the capital, the lads were sitting at table and eating. One of the boys complained that they were being fed the same food again. It was the 4th day in a row that they had been given jerky for lunch. The boy further sadly stated whether he would have joined the knighthood if he had known that this would happen here. Another one of his interlocutors remarked that it was too much even for a mere knight. Suddenly, that first guy asked Azai if he was still eating this. Suddenly, the red-headed guy curled up, and the interlocutor wondered what was wrong. Had the jerky gone rotten? Isaiah noticed that it wasn't, for his ear itched again. At the same time, he didn't realize who could talk about him now. After the protagonist went to the capital, then she rode in a carriage and fell asleep. After some time on the road, the heroine woke up, and the Duke saw it. He inquired if she was awake. Melody immediately apologized and remarked that she had indeed fallen asleep. The man stated that there was nothing wrong with that since they were almost there. He also stated that he thought Loretta liked the girl a lot. At that time, the little girl was sleeping on the legs of the heroine, and she noticed it. At the same time, the man stated that she was very happy about it. After a few moments, the protagonist again turned to the Duke. To the man, she importantly stated that she wasn't sure what she was talking about, but it seems that Loretta had lost her memory after all. So it turns out that when she asked her what happened before they met, she said that she didn't know anything even about her own mother. That is, Madame. Eventually, it turned out that she was afraid of rain, and hence the incident had left a scar in her memory. The girl did not question her further as she was afraid that she would panic a lot. The Duke stated what he thought to her, just needed more time. He further noted that her name was Melody, and it turns out that he owed her a special debt. The girl immediately stated that it must have been very hard for him, since he is her father. The man stated that he was not sure about that. He further exhaled sadly and stated that he was not sure if the girl was his daughter. Suddenly, the heroine cried out that Loretta was his daughter exactly, as she looked so much like him. He thought that was very interesting, for anyone in her position would say as much now. But the heroine went on to say that she not only looked like him, but she also had the same gloss as the Duke. The heroine asked if he didn't feel happy when he watched his own daughter sleeping. The man asked with surprise, "Such a one, in general, can make such a one happy." At this point, the girl knows the plot, Novella thought, so that he would put up with it, because soon himself, without realizing it, will become part of her fatum. At the moment when their carriage had already reached the capital, there were knights who turned to the Duke. One of the knights said that His Majesty the Emperor was urgent and was looking for him. The Duke remarked that he had indeed been gone for a month, which turns out to be no surprise at all. Next, he declared for the two to ride without him, for he had urgent business to attend to. The two girls got to the place to which they were to live and looked at it joyfully. For the house to which they arrived looked very aristocratic and solid. On the threshold of this house, the girls were waited for by the butler and the manageress. Also at their backs was a whole crowd of maids who lined up in a row on two sides. The man immediately dodged the girls and stated that the Duke had told him everything. She then turned to dear Lady Loretta and remarked that his name was Higgis, and he was the butler in the house. The woman who was standing next to him also introduced herself and stated that her name was Madame Higgis and she was the housekeeper. The butler then gave his hand to the little girl and stated that he was escorting Lady Loretta into the mansion. She was startled and inquired of her friend if they would be together. The girl remarked not to worry, for she would come to her later. Next they left, and the butler stated to the little girl that she should not worry because it was not far away. The heroine looked at her and thought that she was such a cutie after all. Suddenly, I was approached by the very same woman housekeeper. She called her a dirty girl and remarked to her to come down because what is she standing there waiting for? After that, a small amount of time passed, and the protagonist was already in the bathtub. She looked quite luxurious, and the girl thought, could she really use the bathtub? Next to her was the housekeeper, who began to shout that she had stopped and was standing there. Further inquired if she really wanted to get sick, for she must get in quickly. The girl remarked that she would do that right away. She then stuck her hand in to touch how hot the water was. It turned out to be so hot that the girl stuck it out at once and thought that it was just horror. Next, she took the bucket and thought she needed to add cold water to it. All this was noticed by a woman and wondered what she was doing now. The heroine thought sadly and wondered if she had done something wrong. The housekeeper kept yelling that she should have said that the water was hot. At this, she asked how on earth the girl could lift such heavy weights with the skinny legs she had. She then added cold water and stated that it should be fine now, so let her get in. The protagonist obeyed her and climbed into the bathroom because the water really turned out to be fine. Then she splashed in the water and wondered if she could really use it all. Miss Gigas looked at the girl and told her to sit in the warm bath. The girl, for her part, was overjoyed and thought it had been so long since she had bathed in warm water. After a while, the housekeeper approached the girl again, and she noticed that it was necessary to look at the back, for she thought it was necessary to add grass, as it smelled bad. The girl inquired in surprise about their same herbs, and then thanked the madam. The woman stated that the girl looks like she was just born, and she herself tries to imitate adults. That's why she asks her to call her grandmother. The main character asked how dare she call her grandmother, but the woman only asked her to sit still and not spin around. After a while, Melody and Loretta met again. The little girl looked at her friend and was fascinated by the sight. The heroine asked what she looked like since her grandmother had given her pajamas, and they looked like a dress. The little girl stated that she is the most beautiful person in the world. Next, the little girl asked Loretta what about her dinner. This she said because she had never eaten so much meat in her life. Her companion noticed that this was true because the meat was really very tasty. Afterward, Melody remarked to her friend that it was time for her to go to bed, and tomorrow they would go for a walk in the garden. The little girl wondered if she had to go to her room. She looked very sleepy and even asked if she could stay at her place. The protagonist covered the interlocutor with a blanket and said that she was not worried and just slept. After all, her grandmother had recently said that she could sleep with her. The girl further mentally thanked Loretta for staying with her. Morning came, and suddenly someone entered the room the girls were in. The heroine was lying on the other side of the bed with her head away from the door. She thought that it seemed that grandmother had come and it was necessary to get up. But suddenly, she heard someone saying that the girl was nasty. This person was a boy who looked at Loretta and said that she was nasty and skinny. At the same time, he wondered if she was really a member of the Baldwin family. He also wondered why she was sleeping here and not in her other room. He further stated that he rarely wanted a morning greeting since she still wasn't awake. He might as well do it. The main character was awake and heard everything this boy said. In doing so, he didn't notice that she was awake. Melody remembered the plot, the short stories, and thought that this must be this very second brother of Loretta's, whose name is Ronnie Baldwin. Ronnie looked around the room some more and looked at his own sister. He then moved closer to her and thought that maybe she should be pinched to wake her up. Further stated that she was nasty and should get up. But the moment he tried to touch her cheek, then the main character came up and grabbed his hand. She further showed the boy to be quiet, and he was shocked at what just happened. The boy, shocked, immediately took his hand away. In doing so, he did not realize what he should do, nor did he understand what had happened. That was why, confused, he lost his balance and immediately fell backwards. Because of this, he could not hold himself up and immediately collapsed to the floor. At this very moment, the boy wondered where the girl had come from. Next, he looked up to see who she was. The main character at this time was a little scared and reached out her hand to the boy to help him. While doing so, fearfully, she inquired if he was okay at all. Ronnie didn't answer anything and immediately got up, but it was obvious that he was quite angry. He went on to say that the girl was lying to get here. The girl wondered with surprise what he was talking about because she didn't understand. The boy cried out to her. She was going back to where she came from and called her a liar at that. He then headed towards the exit and remarked that he couldn't believe that people were coming in here and hurting his father. The girl had no time to say anything to him and only watched him leave and slam the door behind him. At the same time, she thought he didn't like her at all. Still, she couldn't think that they wouldn't get along right away. All these sounds woke Loretta and she got up at once. The girl asked Melody what had happened. The heroine in turn leaned over to her and asked how her lady slept. The girl asked what she was saying. Since it sounded so strange, she didn't like it. The heroine remarked that it was right after all, for it was really her lady now. She noticed that her name was just Loretta, and not any non-lady. Sometime afterward, the Duke and his butler were walking around the neighborhood of the estate they lived on. Wayne inquired what he had in his hands was not the elder's ice letter. The interlocutor remarked that they were indeed. Suddenly, someone addressed the Duke, and he immediately turned his head to see who it was. There appeared to be Loretta, who declared that she wanted to be as big as he was. The man wondered in amazement if that was really the case. He then favored the butler to pay to leave with a gesture and began to speak to the girl. He asked the little girl if she enjoyed her breakfast. The girl with a smile on her face stated that indeed, it was good. Further continuing to smile, the girl stated that when she grows up, she will be just as big as him. The Duke didn't understand why she was saying that, but agreed to it. Suddenly, there were maids addressing the lady. One of them stated that she hadn't finished the girl's hair, so they needed to go back. The little girl turned around and wondered if it was her sister's. When the maids approached them, they immediately apologized to the Duke. The man stated to them that it was cold outside, so they should put a coat on the girl. The maids then bowed to him and started to walk back. So one of them asked the lady not to run away from them anymore. The Duke, for his part, continued to look at the letters that were in his hands. After a while, he returned to the manor again and walked with the butler. To him, he stated that he thought it would be worthwhile to remove all sharp things, for it could be slippery here, and the children like to run about. The interlocutor stated that it would be done. Wayne asked afterward if there has been any more response from the temple. The butler apologized and stated that there had been a reply, but they said that the high priest was very busy at the moment. Hearing this, the Duke stated that he thought it was time to ask the high priest for a favor. It turns out that as a last resort, they could just increase the amount of donations as the temple is asking for. He headed up the stairs next and noticed that he needed to get back to work. Suddenly, he was stopped by the butler. The man turned to him, and the man inquired if he wanted to see Lady Loretta. Still coming out with that Miss Melody, now reading her a fairy tale. The Duke stated that he has to work, so he asks that the man go for him. Higgis stated that he understood him. At this time, one of the maids stated of her interlocutor Patty that she would not be going out on the town for a while. The girl inquired but why that was so. She further stated to Alta that they had always agreed that they wore the badges of the Hertz workers, but she did so in a whisper. The interlocutor remarked that of course they did. She further stated whether she knew what the girl working for the Stewarts had told her. At this, she remembered what that girl had told her. She then wondered if she was working for Baldwin. At that, she wondered, and what it was like to serve the motherless children after all. Alita stated that that was what it was like. Patty wondered if that was really what it was like. Still not surprising, since they don't even know if she is the Duke's daughter. It follows that the Duke has not even said a single affectionate word to her. She further stated that it was none of their business after all, for it was not even their business. At this point, her interlocutor inquired, but could they not just leave it at that? After a while, the table in front of Loretta was set. On it was a huge number of desserts, which were mottled with colors and looked very tasty. The little girl's attention was immediately attracted, and she wondered if she could eat it all. The maids were near the girl, and Alta said that of course she could eat it, for they were all hers. The girl was very much pleased and declared that she would have a good meal. Thereupon, Alita went up to Lady Loretta and addressed her at once. She asked her what she wanted. The maid inquired if she was not curious as to whether or not she was really the Duke's daughter. Suddenly, a girl approached Patty and wanted to ask what she was carrying, but she stopped her. The other maid kept asking the girl. She didn't know that either, after all. The girl stated that she did know it after all. Alita wondered how she could even know it. She asked who told her such a thing, and if it was a priest who walks around in white clothes. The girl nodded her head, saying that it was not, and stated that Melody had said so. The maids began to discuss who Melody was, and the girl stated that she was the girl who was brought in with the lady. Further, one of the maids stated to the lady that no one would believe that at all. Still, only a priest from the temple could recognize her as the daughter of the Duke. The girl inquired what other priest and why he was needed, but the interlocutor added that this was not all. Still, to be accepted, you still need to behave well and nice. Then she said that the Duke's daughter could use his room on the second floor, and then she added, dreamily, that she would like that. After a moment, she realized that she had said too much, but Loretta did not notice it. At that moment, the girl left some food and declared that she wanted more of this. Alita turned to her and wondered what to do if Miss Melody was in danger. It was still coming out that if the girl could not prove to the priest that she was the Duke's daughter, Melody would be sent to the dungeon to the wrong people. The little girl was frightened and wondered if really with Melody can do such a thing. This very evening, the protagonist was combing the girl's hair and she turned to her. The little girl stated to Melody that she wanted to ask her something. She inquired if her friend could teach her how to do cute things. The heroine was surprised and stated, "Do cute things really need cute things?" She thought for a while and then told the little girl to take a deep breath first. Loretta obeyed her and did as she said. Next, Melody stated for her to exhale. While doing so, she remarked that she had done a great job and was doing just fine. The little girl wondered if the Duke would like her if she just breathed like that. The little girl remarked that she was pretty even when she was just breathing. She then asked why she wanted the Duke to like her. The interlocutor said that just today the maid Alta told her something. Then the girl told the information that if she does not prove her belonging to the Duke, they will both be kicked out, and Melody will be put in the dungeon. The heroine listened to all of this and noticed that's when it comes out. The little girl hugged her friend tightly and tearfully remarked that she must be recognized as the Duke's daughter in order not to be taken away. So it came out that she would in no way let that happen. Then she asked what she should do in this situation. After all, it turns out that she wants to become much closer to the good Duke. The heroine wondered what she was saying, what kind of a good Duke. At this very time at night, a butler with a lantern was walking down the corridor of the building the girls were in. Suddenly, he noticed a gentleman and approached him. To the man, he stated that he was surprised not to find him in the study, for he had not said he was leaving. The Duke also looked at him and noticed that he wanted to ask him something too. The protagonist asked her friend if he was kind. The little girl remarked that of course he was. After all, he allowed her friend to go with her, and so she even likes him a little. So she wondered if she liked him. Melody stated that she was afraid to ask him because she didn't think he would allow it. But eventually, her grandmother told her that they removed all the glass jewelry in the mansion because the Duke doesn't want him to not hurt himself. Loretta wondered if this was really true. The heroine in turn continued to talk and stated that so really she likes him too. The girls looked at each other and after that started smiling. At the same time, the Duke, who was in another part of the room, was wondering if the children liked the sky blue color. After that, a small amount of time passed, and the girls stood in shock at the gifts that were on the table. They were gifts from the Duke as a thank you for taking care of the garden. The main character looked at this and thought that she wanted to spend much more time in the garden than she expected. She still couldn't believe that the Duke had personally handed them the gifts. Loretta at this time was very joyful and immediately put on this hat that was given as a gift. With joy on her smile, she shouted out that she would wear it to go to the garden. Next, the little girl put on the hat and ran around the table, while the protagonist sat nearby on a chair and looked at the gift. The butler stated that indeed the young mistress could put it on and go to the garden after she had eaten. It also turns out that they can play there for as long as they wish. The heroine in turn continued to sit quietly and consider the gift. She further stated that she would like to go and thank the Duke for this beautiful gift to begin with. The clipping stated that Mistress Melody did indeed have excellent manners. The housekeeper stood nearby and stated that the Duke would be back quite late tonight. The butler remarked that even though that was true, he could tell the Duke that Mistress Melody was very grateful to him for the gift. The heroine immediately thanked him for it. The man further stated that the Duke would be very pleased to know that the girl was wearing his gift. After this, the heroine put on her hat and inquired if she was going. The butler happily stated that this hat does look great on you later, Melody. He then inquired what the madam standing next to him thought about it. She stated that it looked like an expensive hat had been put on a sheep. At this time, the maids were walking down the street and discussing something with each other. Patty stated that it had been a long time since she had seen a box of such luxuries. Alita, in turn, remarked that Mrs. Lorgnette was indeed very much appreciated here. The interlocutor then stated that if she had indeed confirmed that she was the Duke's daughter, whether or not the woman would have gone to the second floor. Alita stated that she was smart enough to make it go smoothly. Still, it turns out that underestimating her is a great folly. Suddenly, Loretta appeared and greeted the maids, but they didn't expect in any way to see her here. They were also hiding boxes of gifts from the girl. Alita stated that she thought the mistress was already tired and wondered if she wanted the maid to bring her some to buy. The girl smiled and remarked that she would, and for Melody to bring some for her as well. After a while, the maid did so. The girl was drinking some kind of liquid, and she turned to her and asked if she thought the Duke had become very kind to her. The little girl wondered what he was on such a subject now. It was coming out, after all, that he had always been so kind to her. But Alita continued to eat, wondering since when the Duke began to behave like this. It would appear that, as she said, he had sent her that nice hat because it was nice. The little girl wondered if that was the only reason. The maid further remarked, who after all gives luxurious gifts to a stranger for no good reason. The little one remarked that she was not a stranger after all, she was his daughter, and her name was Loretta. Alita wondered if the lady had forgotten everything again. She had already said that she was not his daughter until the priest confirmed that she was the Duke's daughter. Then she leaned over to her and asked if the girl remembered that she had told her to be friendly and nice to the Duke. It turns out that was the only way she would be able to go to the temple and get that very confirmation. Patty stated to her coworker that she had had enough of all this talk. Her interlocutor remarked that it was indeed obvious that it was thanks to her that Madame had received the gift. She further inquired of Mistress if she was saying it correctly. The little girl in turn stood there and answered them nothing. At the same time, she was considering different sides. Suddenly, she noticed someone and immediately ran there. The maids did not realize what it was. She took her turn shouting to Granny. The maids looked ahead, and there they spotted the housekeeper. A girl ran up to her and called out to her to come with her. Alita noticed the woman and was worried about Madame Higgis standing right in front of her. Loretta stated to the woman that Melody said if she had any problems, she was the one who could talk to the Duke, the butler, or her grandmother. That's why she's wondering from her grandmother if she knows who gave her the hat. It turns out to be very interesting now. It seems like she should be thankful for that. She's only having second thoughts because the maid said she should thank her, but somehow she's not so sure about that. After a while, the woman was walking down the corridor of the manor, and the same bounding Alita was running after her. The girl tried to justify herself and said that she thought the mistress was too small, and therefore she had misspoken. Can, in turn, heard all her words and noticed that it was not so, because she definitely said everything correctly. It turns out that she is good at talking, because Melody praised her. But she felt very sad because Alita said that Melody should be in jail. The maid didn't have her face on at this time, and the housekeeper looked at her angrily. Alita tried to load up and stated that she never said such a thing. The girl remarked that it was she who had said it to her yesterday in the garden after all. She also said that she wasn't the Duke's daughter until the priest confirmed it. And it also turns out that she said she had to be nice and sweet to the Duke for him to accept her. And that was why the two of them were in her room on the second floor, and there was something else she wanted to add. The maid immediately turned to the mistress and inquired how dare she say so, and his of the thing. The mistress didn't say a word and immediately pointed her hand towards the maid. At the same second, she snatched off the badge that belonged to her. The girl realized that this was a very bad sign and did not know what to do in this situation. She looked at the woman with fear and immediately began to beg for mercy. At this very moment, she knelt down in front of her and cried out that she was very sorry about it. It turns out that she had done a very wrong thing and was repenting for it all. Next, Alita turned towards the girl and asked the mistress how she could do such a thing to her. She further shouted to the girl that she didn't even understand anything about why she should have gotten here. After that, she immediately stood up and shouted that it was all the fault of that little rascal. At this very time, she swung her hand at her, and though her body to hit at once. But at that very time, Melody appeared in front of the little one, who protected her with her body and shouted that Alta dare not touch the mistress with her hands. After what happened, a small amount of time passed, and the protagonist together with Loretta sat at the table. At this time, there was a huge cake in front of them, and the maids were lined up, as well as the butler and housekeeper. The man stated that one of their maids had acted badly to the mistress instead of treating her with respect. The woman remarked that this maid was immediately kicked out. She remarked that she was sorry, for she should have realized what kind of person she was before hiring her. Loretta at this time inquired of the granny if she could sit down that carrot cake. The woman did not expect such a question and remarked that of course she could do so. The protagonist stated that in that case, would they like to join them and eat it with them? At this time, the little girl joined her and stated that they really should eat it together. And it turns out that if she and Melody eat it together, the two of them will have stomach aches. The heroine at the same time stated that it is really delicious. The housekeeper along with the butler glanced amongst themselves. After that, they did accept the girl's offer and sat down with them to eat. One of the maids stated that she would cut off a piece for everyone. The man stated that his wife really had golden hands, and the woman was shy and remarked for him to calm down. Loretta took a piece of cake and handed it to one of the maids. As she did so, she stated for the girl to take the piece of cake. It was kind of strange to her, but she thanked the girl for it nonetheless. At this time, some man walked by nearby and looked at what was going on there at their table. He immediately stated that he thought the manor was becoming a haven for all sorts of scum. A short while afterward, the butler was in the Duke's study. At this, he stated that he was very sorry to trouble him about such a matter. Wayne inquired what had happened to the dismissed maid. The interlocutor remarked that measures are being taken now so that she cannot get a job anywhere else. He also remarked that her personnel file would be sent to the capital houses. Suddenly, the Duke stopped him and stated that this should not be done. It turns out that he should send her file to the body of mansions that are closer. Also, it is necessary to put his seal in the letters because as a result of this, they will reach faster. The butler remarked that he would take care of all this right away. Wayne then asked how the children were feeling. The butler said that the girls had only recently returned from a walk. He then apologized and noted that Lady and Miss Melody had a little tea party after the walk. The Duke in turn remarked that he had thought it was a party, not a simple tea party. The laughter had reached here after all. He apologized again for that. Next, Wayne talked about hats, and the man asked what he meant. But then there was a knock at the door, and the Duke would stop talking about it. The butler immediately took notice of it and went to open the door to the study they were in. When he opened the door, Melody stood there, holding her hat in her hands and greeted the butler. The butler announced to the Duke that Miss Melody had arrived. The girl in turn greeted the Duke. She further stated that she had come to thank him. It turns out that Miss Loretta had fallen asleep, that's why she came instead. The man inquired what else was meant in her place. The protagonist remarked to him that she owed him a great deal. Still, she would like to express her thanks in a letter, but she did not know how to write yet. She further stated about a tea party, but the man must have been busy after all. Next, she added that Lady Loretta was so good at inviting people over. It turns out that if the Duke was around, he would probably go too. Suddenly, the man got up and approached the girl while stating with coldness in his voice that he didn't like tea parties. He then added that the girl should go back to her room. At this time, he noticed that the girl's face had somehow darkened. He immediately wondered why she had turned pale, if she was sick or something. The man also stated that children should not be walking around at such a late hour. The maid who was next to the girl and apologized immediately for this. And while she was apologizing, then the protagonist turned to the man. The girl with a smile on her face looked at the man in front of her and noticed that this hat is very beautiful. That's why she is very grateful to him for it. It turns out that she will keep it all this time. The Duke was a little embarrassed and remarked that it was a good thing. After a while, the protagonist was in her room and was in front of an open window with a book in her hands. In this, the girl thought that the wind was really getting cooler. Yes, and no errands for her to run here. Suddenly, she realized what she could do and went straight there. And she went to the kitchen, which was run by the housekeeper. The woman asked the girl why she was poking around the kitchen. Melody said that she was only here because she wanted to help. It appeared that her hands were bored with cooking. The woman looked at what she was doing and shouted the same thing, wondering if she was in the clouds. The girl wondered what she meant by that. The housewife noticed that she was offered a taste of delicious flavored peanuts and wondered what her actions would be. The protagonist inquired about nothing if she tasted it. The interlocutor remarked, "Is she really waiting for her to feed it to her herself?" The protagonist then tasted it and remarked with joy on her face that it was delicious. The woman stated that it turns out with her taste buds, there is definitely nothing wrong with her. She further stated that she cared about today, but that she should stay out of the kitchen this week. There would be plenty of work to do without her after all. Melody wondered if something big was coming up. The woman noticed that the three and the elders had arrived. As a consequence, it would be necessary to give a good reception to these grumblers. The protagonist immediately thought that the elders had arrived at the mansion before Loretta had been sent to the temple. The housekeeper looked at the girl's work and stated that she was already doing quite well now. She also added that she would bring her some peanuts so the girl should follow her room. Still, it turns out that if the child wanders alone for such a time, it will not lead to anything good. The heroine listened to her and said that she would do so. The time was already quite late, and it turns out that the girl walked through the mansion with a candle. In doing so, she wondered what it was about these elders. After all, it turns out that Loretta is the daughter of the Duke, exactly invariably. Suddenly, the girl heard a door open beside her. A stream of air headed toward her and immediately blew out the candle, which illuminated everything at the girl. Immediately, the protagonist remembered the words of the housekeeper. The woman had told her that if a child wandered alone around the mansion, it would definitely not lead to anything good. And now she thought why the woman had not told her about it before. Suddenly, in the darkness, the girl felt someone touching her from behind and immediately became alert. Then she turned around and only wanted to scream, but suddenly stopped. At the same time, she saw a guy and wondered if it was young Mr. Ronnie. After a while together, they went to the room where the girls and the guy said that he deigned to come to her, and it turns out that she did not even prepare tea for him. The protagonist noted that all this is because it is too late. At the same time, she asked if he wanted a peanut because her grandmother helped her. The boy was surprised and asked if she thought he was a little kid. Then the girl also stated that she would like to eat alone, if he did not mind. The boy, for his part, sat at ease and looked away. Melody inquired as to why he had come after all. Ronnie asked if she had heard the latest news. The girl wondered what he was talking about. The guy noticed that he was talking about guests. The protagonist asked if he was talking about the Duke being visited by the elders. Hearing this, the boy was very much surprised and asked how she knew all this. The girl casually inquired if he had come just to tell her about it. The boy further remarked for her to come closer to him. The girl asked what he was carrying, but the one continued to tell her to give him her ear here. The heroine got closer and asked what he wanted. The guy started to whisper quietly in her ear that she should be careful with the elders. It turns out these people don't really like them after all. That's why they might try to get rid of her. At this very time, one of these elders walked by the room they were in. The girl couldn't believe her ears and wondered if young Mr. Ronnie, who was quite cruel in the original story, was now worried about Loretta. Still, from what she remembered from the original novella, the guy had always said that he was sure the girl would be kicked out of here soon. The heroine further stated that she would definitely pass that information on to her. The boy wondered what she was carrying. The girl went on to say that she was sure that Loretta already knew how worried he was about her. Ronnie immediately cringed. Had she really lost her mind now? The girl didn't understand what had happened and wondered if he was worried about her and not Lady Loretta. The boy at this time said nothing, but turned the other way, because he blushed very much. The protagonist said to the young gentleman is very sorry for this situation. It turns out that she is very much glad that he is worried about Loretta, and she will no longer joke like this. The boy stated, "What is it that she has such a nerve right now?" After all, he was pretty sure that sooner or later she would be kicked out of here. He further looked at the girl and noticed that she would not change anything just by making such a pitiful face. The obvious fact is that she is the one that the old people hate the most. Melody stated that she is merely a child who grew up with her. That is why she doesn't think she could get their attention. After all, it turns out that even the young gentleman doesn't care about her at all. The boy immediately inquired who it was that she was indifferent to. The girl afterward asked what he had just said, for she had not heard. The boy stated for her to forget it all and immediately went to leave. Before he closed the door, he shrieked that it was also quite scary. The protagonist heard all his words and immediately thought that compared to the Duke, the young gentleman is like melted butter. After a while, there was a tea party of the Duke along with the 3 elders who had arrived at the estate. One of the men inquired if the Duke knew what was paramount to them. It turns out it is all about preserving tradition and protecting the honor of the Duchy of Baldwin. Another man asked the Duke how he thought the fact that the Duke was looking for his daughter would affect the prestige of the family and any speculation. The gray-haired old man stated that he hoped that the one would at least maintain his dignity while doing so. The protagonist, along with her friend at this time, had just started to eat breakfast. At this time they were very sleepy and had not eaten enough at all, dragging their food in barely. Melody looked at the maids and wondered if she thought they had something to say. Those in turn shrieked that they couldn't hold it in any longer. They also stated that another gift had arrived for their lady. The girls were shocked and wondered what not such a thing was just now said. Next, they brought the very same gift and stated to open it quickly. Loretta opened it and the maids were shocked at what was in there. They wondered what those lovely green bows were because it was just a very gorgeous color. The woman also stated that the Duke must have thought that the network with this lady's will shine even brighter. The girls, in turn, were delighted with the gift and considered it carefully. At the tea party at this very time, a discussion was going on. One of the men declared that even aristocrats must be very careful. He remarked that it could be assumed that that girl from the slave trading house was indeed the daughter of a duke. But still, he can't understand what the same girl who came here with her is forgetting. He also can't imagine what went through the Duke's head when he allowed the slave trader's daughter to come here. The man immediately thought about the whole situation that had happened to him in the house when he first saw her. He further stated that he had decided that this child would live here and he had a case for her. One of the elders wondered if he was really going to give her a job. Also, does he really want to use the child's labor? Another of his elders stated that this was simply unacceptable. Finally, a third elder spoke up and said that it was a big mistake to make a criminal a servant. As a result, it turns out that the duchy will become a laughingstock after this. The Duke said that the girl is not a criminal and has nothing to do with the slave trade, and it turns out that she was brought here by his decision. She is officially his guest. At these words, the oldest of the interlocutors only laughed. At the same time, he said that the Duke should know that no matter what the circumstances, the blood from the blood of a criminal is disgusting in itself. At this time, the children in the next room were rejoicing at the gift from the Duke. After all, the jeweled bows he had given them looked quite attractive, and the elder who was in audience with the Duke continued to talk as well. He remarked that they would not allow a single drop of such foul blood to be in this estate, or rather, in the Duchy of Baldwin. The old man further inquired what the Grand Duke would say now that he had learned the situation more deeply. Wayne, in turn, remembered his father. The man had told him earlier that he was a man who was easily emotional and asked if he could protect his family. Answering the question, the Duke stated that then he would be upset. At the same time, he remarked that his father had taught him that the right to make any decision as a guest belongs to the host of the house. And now it seems to him that many people are trying to challenge that right. Hearing such words, one of the elders only wanted to say something, but suddenly he was interrupted. At that moment, there was a knock on the door of the room they were in, and immediately a butler entered. He apologized to the Duke for interrupting their conversation. He added that he had only interrupted it because news from the temple had come. Wayne immediately stated that he should leave then. The elders tried to stop him, but they failed, and he left. After a while, the protagonist together with Loretta sat in her room. The little girl asked Melody if she had seen at dinner what scary grandfathers were looking at them, only whispering about something. The heroine stated that she had seen it, but they did leave early, letting the girls enjoy the delicious food. Suddenly, Melody remarked to her companion to wait a second and grab a pillow, and walked over to her. The little girl, in turn, looked at her with surprise, and the heroine told her that this night they should go somewhere. And after that, together, they went slowly to the very place they needed. On the way, Loretta asked where they were going. Her friend stated that they were heading to the safest place in the house right now. Wayne was in his room at this time and was looking out the window at night. As he did so, he thought about the fact that he should have moved the girls to the second floor. It turns out that he had certainly stepped up security, but it was still worth being cautious. Suddenly, his musings were interrupted by the knocking of the door to the rooms he had been in all this time. Immediately, the man went there and thought how much it pissed him off. He did not realize who could dare to disturb him at such an hour, so he immediately opened the door, and what he saw shocked him. And all because in front of him, he saw girls who were in their night pajamas. The main character asked him if he could help them. The Duke was shocked and wondered what the girl was saying. The heroine repeated the question again about whether or not he could help them. The man inquired as to what kind of help they were talking about now. Melody remarked that she only wanted to keep her safe. The man immediately thought that despite her age, she had never shown that she felt what this threat was. So he inquired as to what kind of safety we were talking about now. The girl remarked that it was all just in case. After all, Ronnie's brother had said she needed to be careful. The Duke asked if Ronnie had really told her that, and the girl stated that she had. Immediately afterward, the man let them in, and they sat at the table with a cup of tea. The girl stated to the interlocutor that she had been thinking about it, for there seemed to be no one more trustworthy on the estate than the Duke. The interlocutor asked why she thought so. The heroine remarked that, as she had told him before, it was because the Duke was indeed Loretta's father. At that, she thought that really it's not just for that reason. After all, we have a cutie. Immediately after that, she remembered the plot of this novella and what happened this night. Although it still needs to be confirmed that Loretta is his real daughter, he still saved her from the old man that wanted to kidnap her. The Duke at this time was looking at the girl, who was very pensive. He further stated that he understood all of this. At the same time, he added that he would ensure her safety and swore on his name. The protagonist immediately thanked the Duke for this and wished them a good night. The man looked at the girl in surprise, and suddenly, the little girl who was sleeping peacefully on the Duke's bed woke up. She looked at Melody and wondered what she was going to do. The heroine stated that she should go to her room to sleep, but Lady Loretta should stay here with the Duke. The little girl wondered why Melody couldn't sleep here, since the bed was quite big. But the heroine remarked that everything would be fine even if she left. The man at this time just looked at them and listened to the whole conversation. While doing so, he remembered what the elders were saying. They asked him what this brat who came with him was doing here, because the blood from the blood of a criminal was disgusting in itself. It came out that no foul blood should be allowed into the sanctuary of the Baldwin Duchy, and not a single drop of foul blood should be allowed to be here. Suddenly, his knowledge was interrupted by the cry of a little girl who declared that without Melody, Loretta would cry just like last time. That was why the girl must stay by her side. And so she asked Mr. Duke if she was speaking correctly. The protagonist immediately tried to talk her out of it, but suddenly the Duke declared that he really must be talking. The heroine did not expect such a thing and was shocked. After that, the girls actually stayed in his room to spend the night. And further, they started fooling around, and Loretta wondered if Melody was soft. The heroine was embarrassed and stated that she couldn't be reckless in the Duke's room. Wayne continued to be in the room and heard everything they were saying. As he did so, he remembered the housekeeper who kept confusing Melody's name and calling her baby girl. And now he was realizing that seemed to be why Madame Higgins was calling her that. The little girl pointed to the bed and told the Duke that it was his place, but he remarked that it turns out the Duke doesn't sleep in the same bed with anyone. Loretta wondered if you become a Duke, you have to sleep alone. Then the little girl became very sad, and she wondered what she should do. After all, it turns out that Loretta wants to sleep with Melody, even when she grows up. The Duke looked at the girl and thought that really this little girl really believes that she is the Duke's daughter. He thought, is this child really naive, or maybe he can be once blind? Either way, he doesn't realize that it's not her for being defiant. Further thought that the girl could change the atmosphere prevailing in the duchy. Suddenly, his lordship was approached by the protagonist. The man inquired what had happened. The girl, in turn, thanked him for fulfilling her request, and also, with joy on her face, thanked him for the gift. After all, it turns out that she really liked the bow and the color of the duchy. The Duke wondered with surprise how she knew what color it was. The girl noticed that it was used for all the decorations in the hall, and also the edging of the letters was green everywhere too. The man stated that she was indeed very observant. Heroine was embarrassed, but stated that she really is. She also stated that she was very grateful to him for being so kind to her. Wayne remarked for the girl to just take it as a given, because that's why there's nothing wrong with it. Melody added that she was just very happy, that's why she wanted to thank him for everything. Then her face and speech became sadder, and she said that she was sorry if she had inconvenienced him by her actions. The Duke moved closer to her and stated that this was not the time for the children to be awake, so he asked her to go to bed. Next, he took a blanket to cover the girls and put them to bed after all. Lastly, Melody only wished him good night, and may he have sweet dreams. The man was surprised, and the girls fell asleep a few minutes later because it was already late at night. After that, the Duke went to the picture of the woman that stood on the table and addressed mentally to her. He asked her if she knew that ever since he had accepted the title, he had been working hard and trying not to give in to his emotions. Now he stood looking at the sleeping girls and thought that this time he wasn't sure he could handle everything. After all, it turns out that no matter what the temple's answer would be tomorrow, he didn't think he would be able to part with these little girls easily at all. After that, he smiled and thought that if only the woman were here, she would give him the answers to all these questions that were troubling his head at the moment. The next day, the finished carriage was already standing outside the estate where the protagonist lived with the Duke. Lady Loretta was just getting into the carriage, and the butler asked her to be careful as she climbed into it. At this time, a number of people were seeing them off, including maids and the very elders who had arrived at the manor. The maids looked at one of them and asked each other if they thought the elders looked too drowned today. The companion stated that perhaps he had just not slept well. At this time, the protagonist was also next to them and looked at them with a smile. At the same time, the girl thought that they must have tried unsuccessfully to find Loretta since the early morning. After all, as the heroine remembered from the plot of the novel, they had to steal her away that day. And it turns out that she had gotten rid of at least one problem from the original. The little girl looked out of the carriage and waved to the girl and suggested that they ride together. At the same time, the maid, she was next to her, asked the mistress not to climb because it is really dangerous. Melody just waved her hand and thought that it was great, because now the blood relation of the Duke and Loretta will be confirmed, because she remembered it from the plot of the novel. Immediately after sending her friend, the protagonist returned to her room and sat at the table, thinking about everything. At the same time, she thought that the channels will not return with good news, then probably will celebrate it all evening. She also knew that Claude, who was studying at the academy, and Jeremy, who was studying at the magic tower, should be back very soon. It turns out that they have to return to the duchy to meet their little sister, and then the same Melody will live happily, watching the joyful Loretta. At the same time, the girl was determined to help her avoid any trouble. Suddenly, there was a knock on her room, and she immediately paid attention to it. She then immediately ran to the door and opened it, hoping that Higgins, the butler, was there. She immediately inquired if the results had become known. But suddenly she stopped her speech, for she saw someone there whom she had not expected to see in any way. She was in a stupor because one of the elders was there. The old man looked at her with a haughty look and said that she looked even more pathetic up close than he had thought. The heroine realized that it turns out this was one of the men who had been at dinner, and now she wondered if they hadn't gone to the temples with the Duke. The girl asked him what business had brought him here. The elder stated that Loretta was indeed the real daughter of the Duke. The protagonist rejoiced and stated that finally came to the answer. At the same time, she thought that she was a bit worried, because something could still go wrong. She told the interlocutor that she was very happy that Loretta had finally been recognized as part of the Duke's family. The interlocutor remarked that he really had no doubt that she was happy about the event. He also added that she would, after all, finally be able to stay here to live without having to think about making money for the rest of her life. Melody wondered what he meant now. The elder asked if she was playing dumb right now. After all, everyone knows the purpose of her dragging around the young mistress all this time. It turns out that this is the case, because Lady Loretta brought her here, but she does not work, but only receives gifts and privileges. The heroine noticed that all this time she was taking care of her. Her companion remarked that she'd been looking after the young lady, but wondered if she thought she was irreplaceable. Melody added that she just knew her better than anyone else. The old man further remarked that the Duke had stated that she would not be a servant since she was his guest, but that she should think carefully. After all, what kind of nobleman could tolerate having the child of a criminal next to his daughter? It turns out that if he doesn't even trust her to wash the plates, then how does she think he can let her continue to be around the young lady? The girl remarked that even so, she knew that many were trying to gain the Duke's favor. Hearing this, the old man immediately approached the girl and tore off her head the bow that the Duke had given her. At the same time, he noted that he knew that she was brazen enough to get into the duchy, but did not think that her insolence would exceed all limits. The girl immediately asked that he return the thing in these hurts to her personally. The man leaned over to her and remarked that the Duke had told him everything, and it turns out that he knew who her mother was. Melody wondered if the Duke was not one to share that kind of story, especially with these old men, and it turns out, as she might have expected, this man had investigated. While the girl was thinking, he picked up a bag of money. In doing so, he stated that it seemed to upset the girl, but she would really feel better if she took this money for her labor. It turns out that she is a guest who brought the Duke's daughter here, and they should take care of her. The main character didn't even look towards the money and immediately turned her head around. The old man saw this, and he was very angry. After that, he immediately grabbed the girl's hand and wondered why she was so stubborn. Next, the old man forcibly dragged the girl outside to the carriage that was prepared for the carriage, which was standing on the road. While doing so, he shouted that if she would only take the money, she and her mother would live a trouble-free life. He wondered how it was possible to be so stupid and called the girl a scoundrel. The protagonist tried to get out and begged him to let go of her hand. The old man kept saying that she was taking care of a strange girl who turned out to be the daughter of a duke, and wondered if she didn't want to take care of her mother. Next, a picture tired in the heroine's mind of her mother standing in front of her. The woman was saying that thanks only to her own daughter she got out of jail. So she praised her and said that now if she went to the Duke and asked him for some money, they would have a whole new life. Then she started yelling, "Can't Melody do that?" At the same time, noticed that she should awaken her desire to try and further began to beat the girl. From these thoughts, the protagonist was very confused and saddened. The old man at this time continued to drag the girl to the carriage to drop her off there. In doing so, he shouted to the coachman to send her to the central prison and did so as soon as possible. The same man declared that he understood the gentleman and would do anything. The girl kept trying to get out and said she didn't want that at all. The man yelled out what a nasty girl this was and continued to drag her by force. At this very time, the heroine was again confronted by her mother, who asked if she really wanted her mother to be alone. At the same time, the girl said that she did not want to do that. She then stated that she was sorry and begged to be forgiven. At that very time, a woman appeared and asked the old man if he had completely lost his mind. The man, along with the girl, immediately turned in her direction to see who it was. There appeared to be the home ruler, Miss Higgins, who was trying to protect the girl. To the man, she began yelling for him to immediately let go of the lady's hand while leaving her alone. Just then, she stepped closer to him and asked him if he thought he could get away with treating the Duke's guests like that. She added that he was an old scoundrel, so let him have a showdown with someone his own age. The woman does not understand why he attacked a little girl at all, that his granddaughters are not good for him. After that, Miss Higgins turned towards the heroine and asked if she was okay, because she saw that the girl is absolutely shaking. She also noticed that you girl did not pay attention to what this marasmus said. After all, it turns out that he is so old that he can say only stupid things. The main character was so sad and scared that she immediately began to cry bitterly. Granny tried to calm her down and begged her to stop crying, because of her now all the water will come out through her tears. The elder was just watching at this time and suddenly turned to Madam Higgins. He noticed that the girl had already received her money for the work she had done. She asked him if he thought it was enough. He wanted to say that the sum would be enough for the rest of her life, but suddenly the woman interrupted him and said that it was nothing. At the same time, it was said that the gentleman must have completely forgotten his place for so long, being near the Duke. She also added that the latter was nothing more than just an old hired man, and nothing more, nothing less. At that very moment, the old man got angry and immediately punched the woman in the face. The housekeeper did not expect such a blow and immediately collapsed to the ground. The protagonist should not expect such a thing and was immediately frightened. That's why she rushed with all her legs to help her grandmother. But suddenly, there was the very coachman who wanted to take the girl away in a carriage. He immediately ran up to the girl from behind and grabbed her, holding her down. The elder shouted to him to put the child in the carriage and leave immediately. The very rascal declared that he would do it all. Miss Higgins, fainting, reached for the girl, trying to say something to her, but did not have time. At this very time, several maids came out from the manor. One of them asked Patty what had happened and why she had gone out. The girl stated that she only went out because she thought she heard Melody screaming, and as soon as they reached the very spot where the carriage had been, they saw Madame Higgins lying on the ground. The maid immediately ran up to the woman, trying to find out what had happened to her. She inquired of the housekeeper if she was all right now. The woman immediately got up and turned to Patty, stating that she had to see the Duke right away. All because that old man had forcibly taken Mrs. Melody away to an unknown destination. The elder, together with that very cabman, finally brought the protagonist to her destination. Here, together, they went down into some cellar, and the historian declared that here they had arrived. The girl was led directly to the cage in which her mother had been sitting all this time. The man wondered what the girl was standing there for, if she didn't want to say hello to her mother. The woman poured out of the cell and looked surprised to see if it was her daughter. The heroine looked at her in amazement, and the old man went on to say that she was so excited to see her. He also added that now she should just take the money and leave the capital with her. And also, it turns out that if she stays away from the Duke, they will never bother her again. After these words, the girl's mother immediately rose to her feet and wondered if they were talking about money. She further inquired if Melody had brought the money and would get her out of here. The heroine at this point only looked fearfully at the distraught mother. A couple hours ago, equally interesting events were happening at the temple. The priest announced that the temple indeed confirms that Miss Loretta is the daughter of the Duke. At this point, the man looked at the Duke and his daughter and wondered what this reaction was all about. After all, they were standing very casually, and he thought that this reaction was as if another response was not entirely expected. Loretta turned to his lordship at this time, and the man immediately turned his attention to her. The girl asked him if Loretta could see Melody now or what. After a while, the Duke along with his daughter finally did return home. In doing so, he was posted about the fact that the girl had disappeared. He inquired of his interlocutor as to what they meant, if indeed Melody had run away. One of the older ones stated that as soon as she got the money, she was immediately traced and went cold. Wayne remarked, wondering if what they meant was that she had asked for payment for her services. The interlocutor noted that this was indeed true, and the fee she asked for was not small, and he was very dumbfounded by it. The Duke immediately dressed and began to leave his office. The man noticed that the girl had planned it all from the very beginning. At that, he asked Wayne where he was going. The man remarked that he wanted to check it out for himself. He also added that the girl is probably still in the capital, and he, in turn, wanted to hear with his own ears that this child had said this exact speech. The elders were immediately frightened, and one of them told his lordship that he simply could not do that. At this, another added that the child would indeed be in danger. At that, one inquired if the man was going to separate her from her mother. The Duke immediately stopped and inquired with surprise as to what they now meant. The interlocutor hesitated for a moment, then stated that the child simply had to be with her mother, even if in a central dungeon. Wayne remarked that, judging by the law, it was illegal to pay money to release prisoners at all. But the interlocutor bent his line again and remarked that he didn't think the girl was too young to be separated from her parents. He also added that the mansion was not the best place for such an ordinary child. The man immediately thought of Melody and thought that she definitely couldn't have done it. That being said, he stated to his interlocutor that Loretta wanted to see her. The elder remarked that the Duke should not worry about it at all, because he has a granddaughter about her age, and they will become friends. It turns out that children can be friends with anyone, and don't let him worry so much. She'll forget about some girl named Melody, and that's it. But then suddenly Loretta shows up screaming that's definitely not going to happen, and it turns out that she'll just never forget about Melody. At this point, she got up on a chair and yelled about it. The elder noticed what was even going on, and where the maids were looking, that they were watching Loretta. And while he was yelling about it, Miss Higgins, the housekeeper, entered the study. She immediately turned to his lordship the Duke and apologized for this. At the same time, she declared that she and Miss Loretta were very anxious to speak to him. In turn, in prison, the elder continued to speak to the protagonist and her mother. To the woman, he stated that her daughter had received money in exchange for the Duke's care. It turns out that half of that money will go towards the bribe for her release. But with all this, the woman must realize that she does not think she can slip out of here just like that. After all, it turns out that the honor of the Duke's house has been tarnished by the appearance of her siblingless daughter. In the end, even the Duke's daughter was tarnished by her appearance. The old man also added that the children of all sorts of scum are overconfident. The heroine at this time was very sad, and she did not understand what she should do now in such a situation. Suddenly, the man was approached by her mom. She noticed that she did not even know who he was, and it did not really matter to her. The main thing for her was to keep the very money they gave her. She only asked if they would get her out of here. The interlocutor remarked that it was the girl that he had given the money to. The heroine stated that the crack did give it to her, but she dropped it outside the Duke's house. The woman at this time aggressively inquired what she was talking about and slapped her hands against the cage. The old man remarked that it was about something he wasn't talking about. At this time, a guard entered the conversation and stated that it seems that the elder is really starting to lose patience. After all, it turns out that he had put the money literally in the hands of this child. The interlocutor stated to take his time. After that, he noticed that now he has nothing on his hands, so the request will have to be canceled. The woman inquired with surprise as to what he was saying. Then she paid attention to the little things and asked if she had lied, because she probably still had the money. At that very moment, the protagonist cried and said she was sorry. The old man noticed this, and then shouted that he had no choice then. After all, she is a good deed to leave sinners on the path of truth. As a consequence, it turns out that the criminals must be together. The girl with the apparition asked what he meant, and the interlocutor said that she should not look at him like that, for she had done everything herself. And suddenly, Melody's mother reached through the cage and immediately grabbed the girl's hand. At this point, she was yelling for the heroine to give her money, and wondered if she really wanted to throw her own mother out and run off with the money. Further, she kept yelling, because if only she hadn't gotten the special and daughter pregnant, she would now be Christensen's famous mistress. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, it ruined her life nonetheless. The protagonist listened to all of this, and she was very hurt by such words. At that moment, a guard came up to her and immediately grabbed her, directing her to the cage. At the same time, he behaved with her very carelessly, and so he shouted at her to get up quickly and move. Still, it appeared that she was doing it very slowly. That is why, with his foot, he was pushing the girl forward. Suddenly, the guard turned his head and saw someone coming, while asking who it was. And there turned out to be Duke Wayne, who was very angry and shouted that he should immediately remove his leg or he would cut it off. At this time, the man had already pulled out his sword and was preparing for battle. Upon seeing the Duke, the man immediately became very frightened. At the same time, he stated, "Is it really his lordship the Duke?" Due to his fright, he immediately backed up and fell backwards. Further, pointing at the elder, he shouted out that it was all him who did it. Along with Wayne came Miss Higgins, the housekeeper, who took the keys to be dropped by the guard. She approached the girl to free her and inquired of the old man how he could do such a thing to someone's sweet daughter. The interlocutor inquired how else cute. After all, can't they all see that she has the look of a criminal? Madam Higgins at this time looked into the cage and saw the girl's mother there. The old man next inquired how on earth this wretch could be called a guest at the Duke's, but no one listened to him, and the woman asked that the girl let her look at the wound on her wrist. The Duke immediately asked the housekeeper how Melody's condition was. The woman remarked that she would take her home in a carriage right away, but Wayne said she should not do that, and let her leave Melody here and wait by the carriage. Madame Higgins declared that she understood and went there. The girl was afraid to stay here alone, but suddenly the Duke came up to her. He sat down beside her and noticed that he had not realized it before, that's why he apologized. Then he took out a bag with money and told her to take this one, because she had dropped it. The girl looked at him in surprise, and the man stated that it was a gift. At that, he added to Melody that she could go with him if she wanted. It also turns out that with this money they could live with the two of them for a while. The protagonist's mother, who was in the cage at the time, immediately noticed the money when it was mentioned. The guard stated to his lordship that the elder had told him that her being here had been coordinated with the Duke. Well, now to the old man, he shouted, that it turned out no one knew. The latter, in turn, waved his hand and remarked to him to forget about it already. Wayne remarked to the girl that this is how he told so-and-so. Heroine said that if all this is true, then she could ruin his words, this future happiness. Duke noticed that he does not care about his future at all. After all, It turns out that without her, his daughter will cry bitterly, and Higgins and his wife will also be sad. The housekeeper at this time stood outside the door and worried very much about what was going to happen. The Duke in turn kept saying that he too would be miserable without her. As a consequence, it turns out that neither of them will be happy then. The girl sadly listened to all this and did not know what to say. But suddenly her mother spoke again from the cell. She told the girl not to tell her that she was going to leave her here. Calling her a sweetheart, she said that with this money she could live happily ever after. She also inquired whether she would rather be someone's slave. Of course, the man would promise to feed and clothe her, so she had no choice. Next, she asked the Duke if her reasoning was correct now. The Duke, hearing that the woman was talking nonsense, suggested that the girl talk upstairs. Melody, in turn, turned back to the cage and stated that she was indeed fine now. The woman noticed this and immediately turned to her own daughter. As she did so, she called her jewelry and her other, but only looked at the bag of money, also saying that she believed that she would definitely not abandon her. Melody pitifully turned to her mom, but she wasn't listening to her at all. At this point, she kept looking at the bag of money and wondering if she had opened it. At the same time, she was very much interested in what was inside, if it was gold. The woman further wanted to claim that the girl had been unable to do anything since birth. At the same time, she said that it did not matter, because mommy would better handle it. This stretched out her hands and stated that she gave her a bag. The heroine did extend her hand forward and remarked that she knew it. Next, she threw the money sack towards her mother and remarked to live happily with her precious daughter. At that moment, the sack fell to the ground and a mountain of gold coins spilled out of it. The woman immediately rejoiced and immediately said, "Are these really gold coins?" At the same time, she called her daughter a fool and remarked that she didn't even know what was inside and threw it away then. The heroine at this time looked at how her own mother greedily grabbed the coins and noticed that it seems her mother really found her real daughter. The woman in turn laughed and happily grabbed each coin very greedily. Next, Melody turned toward the exit and immediately headed that way. The Duke in turn told the woman that in prison, you cannot have anything of your own, that's why her daughter will definitely be stolen. At that time, a guard actually approached her and told her to give it back immediately, because it didn't belong to her. The woman asked what they were telling her, because it all belonged to her. She kept shouting what the guards were doing because she needed to give back all her money. Then she turned to the Melody and asked if she was being tricked again. At the same time, she did not understand how she dares to do it at all. The girl, in turn, did not want to listen to anything and immediately ran away from the place. At the end, the mother only shrieked to her own daughter that she was a stupid pig. After the protagonist left the Duke, stayed there for a while longer, and then went outside. The girl stood by the carriage after they arrived at the manor and apologized to his lordship for leaving without permission. The man noticed that she was still talking about it. The girl added that she was, and she was not a silly pig. The Duke remarked that he knew that very well. After that, he approached the girl and extended his hand to her. While doing so, he suggested that she should finally come home after all. Then he even smiled at her and asked what Melody thought about it. She and the heroine looked at him carefully and just wanted to say, as suddenly she was addressed by name. The girl immediately turned her head to the side and saw that Loretta was there. The little girl with all speed, only as she could run, and immediately hugged her friend. At that, the heroine thought that she really wanted to be with Loretta. After a while, the heroine was already in her room. Next to her was a maid who treated her wounds. At the same time, the girl stated that Lady Loretta and the Duke are really very similar. Irina inquired as to what it was that made her so taken aback. The maid remembered how the little girl had said in front of the elders that if Melody cried, Loretta would also cry, and her grandmother would also cry with them. That's why she stated that they needed to laugh and get Melody back. Next to Go stated that she was so confident and brave even in front of the elders, and it turns out that they are really very similar. While they were talking to each other, it was just as Loretta burst into the room. She was already prepared for bed and had a soft toy in her hands, as well as candy. The little girl approached the heroine and remarked to her that she must have been very frightened. Melody remarked that she was a little really scared. Daria turned to Loretta and the girl asked what she wanted. The protagonist asked her with sadness on her face why she was being so nice to her. The little girl stated that she didn't know that, and then immediately ran up to the girl and hugged her while saying that she loves Melody very much. Such words of the heroine's friend were very touching. She also stated that she loved Loretta very much. The little girl saw that her friend cried and wondered why she was crying now. At this very time, the Duke, as usual, was in his study. A man stood before him, and he inquired of him where Higgins was. The interlocutor at first hesitated a little to answer. He went on to say that Madam Higgins had not left the room since her return, and he had suggested that she should come to him in her stead. That was why he was now apologizing for it. The Duke stated that there was really nothing wrong with it. He then began to sort through the envelopes and inquired about Madam Higgins and Melody. The interlocutor stated that they did not appear to be badly injured. Wayne remarked that they were indeed lucky, but it was still worth calling a doctor. At that time, he read one of the messages that had caught his attention. After it, he told his subordinate to order him to clean the room. The interlocutor inquired which room was now in question. The Duke stated that his eldest son's room should be cleaned, and all this because his son Claude was coming back soon. A while later, Loretta was sitting in her room painting on the windows. The maid turned to her and asked if she was upset because she couldn't draw a face. The girl remarked that she was not. The interviewer then asked if perhaps she didn't want to just share a room with Miss Melody. She also added the question of perhaps eating should bring her favorite peanut dish. The girl wanted to agree, but then stated that she didn't need to do that. The maid continued to pepper her with questions and wondered if perhaps they should go pick leaves in the garden. But the girl remarked that she would go later. At this, she had a very sad face and stated that it is just that Loretta's life is so difficult. The interviewee stated that life can indeed be full of difficulties, but there is definitely some good in it. She then asked if she could find out who was bothering the young mistress. The girl remarked that it was a secret, but the interlocutor said that she would keep it carefully. After the maid promised to keep the secret, the girl began her story. She remarked that at the temple, the grandfather in white had said that Papa and Loretta were now a family, and so from now on they would always be together. The maid wondered if that was exactly what was bothering her. The little girl remarked that of course not, for it is a good thing. Papa loves Loretta, and Loretta loves Papa. The interlocutor inquired then what was wrong. The girl stated that her brother said that Loretta and Melody are not family. She wants to always be with her after all, and life is hard if he's not with her, not family. The girl added that she would love for Melody to be her daddy's daughter as well. The maid inquired if she really wanted Melody to be a member of the ducal Baldwin family. The girl remarked that she did indeed, for she wanted her to be with the family. The girl wondered if there was no other way for the girl to become a member of the family then. The little girl immediately cheered up and asked if there really is such a way. Then she wanted to say it, but kept silent. And now she told it to another maid, and the latter asked her what she wanted to say at that moment. The girl sadly stated that if she had really gotten off her tongue with that word, she could have packed her things now. The interlocutor remarked that indeed she had. After all, despite the fact that Mrs. Melody is a special guest, the Duke's wedding is really over the top. Patty stated that the girl looked at her with puppy eyes and asked her to tell her what could be done. And here she was wondering if she were in her shoes. Wouldn't she have said the word wedding? Suddenly, from behind her back, someone repeated the word wedding. The girl immediately turned around, and with fear she saw the little girl there. She was very enthusiastic and immediately thanked Patty for it. The maid realized what she had done, and immediately she was speechless from it. At the same time, she was very sad and thought what she had just done. The interlocutor, at this time gloating, told her that she thought it was possible to already start packing in advance. The protagonist at this time was in the housekeeper's room and watered the flowers. While doing so, she stated that the maids were applying ointment to heal her wounds, but she had heard that it might still leave a scar. Further stated that she already had many scars, and she didn't think another one would make a difference. Suddenly, Madam Higgins turned to her and wondered what it was all about. After all, she was wondering why the girl still does not change in any way. The protagonist smiled and said that everything is not like that, because she has already made progress. After all, it turns out that not so long ago she learned a bonded gait and asks to see. Madam Higgins stated that she continues to think that it doesn't matter how many scars she has on her body. The girl looked at her in surprise and stated that it was true. The girl remarked that she knew that from the attack. She added that from now on she would give her fewer sandwiches. It will be 5 instead of 6, and it is not such a big difference after all. This moment, Madam Higgins thought that whatever Melody was thinking, but if it was about sandwiches, it would affect her. In her head, she pictured a picture of the girl apologizing and saying she was sorry, because there was a very big difference between 5 and 6 sandwiches. But in fact, it was not at all like she had just imagined. For the girl smiled and declared that, fortunately, she still had her lunches. Granny at this point was completely disappointed and thought that this was a failure. Next, she immediately turned around and pretended as if she was asleep. The girl looked at her in surprise. The madam wondered what she was going to do about this annoying child after all. She wished very much that she would just learn to take care of herself. The protagonist asked the woman if she had a headache now. The housekeeper immediately stood up and remarked that she was fine, so the girl should not worry and calm down. At that moment, the madam remembered the first time she saw the girl in the bathtub and when she saw her mother. She thought that the little girl had only recently been able to escape from the villain who had abused her. And despite all this, she was taking care of a grumpy old woman like her. That being said, the woman realized that the girl still needed to spend more time with someone nicer than her. The girl asked him more if she could get her some water. The heroine was about to leave when suddenly the woman stopped her by turning to her. She inquired if the girl had heard that a young gentleman was coming tomorrow. Melody stated that she had not heard that. At that, the girl realized that on second thought, now was indeed the time. As she remembered from the plot of the novella, the Duke's eldest son really should be back right now. Madam Higgins declared that the young gentleman would certainly want tea in the afternoon. I further stated that when it becomes fair, the girl will be the one to serve him tea. Hearing this, the protagonist was surprised and wondered if she really had to do it. She said that she had recently spoken to the Duke, and he told her to give her a small task. She further added that Melody was now a guest of the Duke. That is why it is necessary for her to learn to accept the relationship she deserves. And to learn how to behave with dignity, then she needs experience. The girl wondered if that was why she would be allowed to be served tea then. Madam Higgins stated that that is exactly the case, and it seems that she is not very confident. Therefore, if she did not want it, she could refuse. But suddenly the girl stated that it really wasn't like that. After that, she smiled and stated that she could do it, and if she didn't try it, no one would know it. The interviewee stated that she was very happy to hear this from her. At the same time, she asked that the girl not to act rude if she didn't want to ruin the young master's mood, and otherwise let her prepare for the consequences. Literally, at this moment, the protagonist immediately got closer to the woman and hugged her. She was very surprised, and the girl stated that she was very grateful to her for worrying about her. She also added that this was why she would give her best. The next day was rainy weather, and finally Claude arrived. To meet the guy, you came out the butler, who stated that the gentleman had grown a lot. The lad remarked that this was necessary to become a gentleman like Higgins. His companion remarked to him not to stop as pathetic as he was. At this, the fellow only laughed and wondered if he was insulting a man whom he had respected for more than 15 years. The butler opened the door to the lad and stated that he was still a joker. Next, Claude inquired where his father was. The interlocutor stated that his lordship was temporarily absent on business. Everyone was asleep at the moment, and he was the only one in the manor still awake. The boy wondered if Ronnie and his sister must have gone to bed as well. The butler stated that they had, as they were still too young. He also remarked that they have a special ochre, and he will tell him about it little by little. Still, he thinks the latter will get along well with her, for their young master is very kind. After a while, Loretta together with the protagonist were on the street. Also next to them was already Claude, and he was playing together with the little girl on the street. Melody stood next to them and wondered what was even going on right now. After all, she had heard that he was supposed to arrive in the afternoon. At that moment, she remembered the words of the housekeeper, who said that the young master would arrive tomorrow afternoon, so she should have breakfast and start getting ready. And while Loretta, along with Claude, were playing, the girl stood close by and was in a world of her own. As she did so, she wondered if the boy had decided to come early because he wanted so badly to see Loretta. The girl remembered thoroughly the plot of the short story, so she knew that this guy's name is Claude Baldwin. He is the most well-mannered and polite guy in the capital. The eldest son of a duke, he has good looks and outstanding abilities. It has often been said that he loves his younger sister Loretta very much. Also turns out to play the role of a perfect older brother. Now the guy approached the girl, or very mannerly greeted her, said that he was pleased to meet, and his name is Claude. The girl immediately thought that Claude was her favorite among all the characters in the novel. It also turns out that she often imagined what her life could be like if she had a family like this one. It was always a literal comfort to her. The protagonist responded by also mannerly stating that her name was Melody, and she was honored to meet his grace. It turns out that she had come to pass the lady a hat, as the sun was baking hard. The guy stated that he had heard of her, and stated that she could hold her head up as everything was fine. The girl thought he certainly knew all about it. At the same time, she realized that the guy was glowing so much that she would soon be blinded by his gaze. At this moment, she was very embarrassed, because in her past life, she was really crazy about Claude. The guy saw that the girl was acting strange somehow, and wondered if there was something wrong with him. He asked if it was so bad that she couldn't even look him in the eye. Melody tried to look at him and remarked that she couldn't, because things weren't at all what he thought they were. The guy immediately smiled in response and remarked that she was really funny. He also added that he was glad to meet Lady Melody. Suddenly, Loretta appeared and ran up to the girl and started addressing her. The heroine turned her attention to her, and the girl stated that Loretta was waiting for Melody to arrive. The heroine inquired if the sun was scorching her head. At that, she gave her a hat and stated for her to put it on. The little girl remarked that it wasn't, as Loretta had a problem. Melody immediately inquired what was wrong with her. Babe stated if she was correct in thinking that Melody and Loretta loved each other. The protagonist remarked that it was indeed true, as she really liked Lady Loretta. The companion held out a flower and stated that then they should get married. The protagonist was surprised to ask what the wife was saying such a thing. Claude, at this very time from the heard words, literally stoned and was shocked. Loretta went on to say that they would get married and then she would make Melody happy. It turns out that they would both be very happy then. The heroine hugged the girl and wondered if indeed Loretta would make Melody happy. Next, for a while, they sat in each other's arms. The little girl began to shower her friend with compliments, and the heroine in response said that she liked Lady Loretta best of all. It is literally from earth to heaven. Suddenly, she felt that something was wrong and immediately turned her attention to Claude. At this time, the guy was standing there with a strange smirk, and the girl thought she was screwed. As she remembers from the plot of the novel, Claude Baldwin is Loretta's perfect brother and terribly jealous. It turns out that he is the ultimate goofy brother. After that, a small amount of time passed, and the protagonist stood near the front door of the room. At the same time, the girl had diarrhea with tea in her hands because she was running errands for the housekeeper and the Duke. At this time, the girl was very worried because she remembered the smile of Claude. This smile was like a real smile of the devil, and she wondered if he was really Loretta's brother. Her head did not leave her thoughts that she was worried, and she did not understand what she should do. After a few moments, the heroine did gather her courage and knocked on the door. Suddenly, it swung open, and there appeared Claude. The girl immediately thought whether indeed he really opened the door for her himself. Further, Melody began to calm herself and thought that Loretta's words about marriage were just a childish joke. That's why the guy shouldn't think anything bad. Claude, seeing the girl, stated that it was Lady Melody. The guy took the tea tray from her hands and remarked that he heard she wanted to learn manners. The girl remarked that indeed this was all true. The interlocutor inquired if it was because she wanted to get closer to Loretta or what. The protagonist smiled and remarked that, of course it is. After all, it turns out that for her there is no respect for a person than Lady Loretta. That is why she will always be by her side. The interlocutor remarked that it turns out that she wants to be always near his sister. The girl heard this and was shocked, for she thought whether she had just aroused brotherly jealousy in him. That's why she immediately stated that she didn't mean to say anything like that. Claude stated okay then. The girl asked what he meant. The guy smiled at her and said goodbye now. Literally a moment later, he went into his room and immediately closed the door behind him. The girl only wanted to address the young gentleman, but he was already out the door. That's why the heroine was shocked and thought that what the hell had just happened. After this event happened a few days, the girl again brought the guy tea and stood chatting next to him. The girl asked the conversationalist if he wanted to know the story of how they met Loretta. Claude stated that it was really not a bad attempt at still not enough for him. That's why he again took the tea tray from the girl and stated that she tried again. The heroine, for her part, was disappointed and thought that she had hoped that at least this time it would work. After another failure, she was walking down the stairs to the manor. She thought that she had tried so hard for so long that, at least once for sure, she should enter the Lord's room correctly. Life in the Duke's house was so happy that she had forgotten how much everyone hated her, because she was ready for it from the beginning. However, the young lord's behavior really made the girl very uncomfortable. She remembered the last occasion when the boy had called her to him. At the same time, Mannerly said that it would be a day there, and she would be better. The girl stated with embarrassment that he was indeed very kind. At that, she thought, and it seemed then that he hated her at all. The guy then stated that of course he must be kind to her, because it was Miss Melody who helped her sister Loretta. The protagonist's musings were interrupted by the man's outcry as to how on earth he could deceive them. He asked in astonishment if they themselves had not refused to cooperate with their trade organization back under the previous Duke. The heroine immediately went downstairs and wondered what was going on here. Suddenly, a man turned to her and declared, "Lady Melody, not to come close." After all, it turns out that now is definitely not the picture that the child should see. The girl wondered if someone was being thrown out. The interlocutor said that simply this person is a deceiver and a liar. It turns out that the Duke hates liars, although, however, everyone hates them. This conversation struck the girl, and she immediately thought about liars. The next day, as usual, the protagonist brought a tray of tea for the young gentleman. After she handed it over, then immediately apologized to him. The interlocutor inquired with surprise that it was she who was now apologizing. The girl hesitated to answer and immediately remembered the words of the interlocutor yesterday. The man, and said that the Duke really does not like liars, and of course, no one in principle does not like them. She thought that although all this is really true, but she has no other choice, because she must confess. She told the boy that the truth was that she had lied to the master. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she was serious. Melody turned her head away and shyly stated that she wasn't really interested in learning etiquette and wasn't very confident. She also didn't know at all if ordinary people like her should be doing it. Claude noticed that this was a misunderstanding, because manners are not something exclusive to aristocrats, at least in the capital. Also, to all that, there was no need to learn manners. In any case, he is very grateful that the girl was honest with him. The heroine, upon hearing this, immediately thought that despite all this, he was helping her. The girl further remarked that she thought the young gentleman hated her, and that's why he brought her back every day. The boy wondered if she was really serious, now saying that. The girl remarked that she was sorry and inquired if indeed he was angry with her. The interlocutor stated that in no way was that the case. It also turns out that he doesn't think she is a liar at all. The girl asked if that was true. At the same time, she looked at him and wondered whether he really thought so now or whether he was lying. Next, the interlocutor, as always in his manner, said goodbye to the girl and immediately closed the door behind him, wishing her a good day. The heroine, as usual, was left alone in front of the locked door and then left. After a time, the maids again escorted the protagonist with tea. One of them stated to Mrs. Melody that she could take it to her today as well. At this point, they surrounded the girl and claimed that they too would like to hold a tea party with the young master. Another girl was saying that she was so jealous because it was so great. She also wondered what they talk about like that usually, so she wondered if he was showing himself in all his glory. The girl didn't answer them anything and only smiled hearing those words. At that time, when she was walking down the corridor, she was wondering what would happen today and whether she would be turned around again. At the same time, she was very curious if yesterday's conversation had changed anything at all. When the girl got to the door, she knocked on it as usual and waited for a response. Nothing followed, and no one even came up to open the door. The girl wondered what it was all about. But suddenly, she thought that she would probably be definitely saved today. After all such seems that the young master is absent today. This news pleased the girl very much, and after all, she will not have to meet him today. After it was followed by an answer, the girl immediately opened the door to enter there. Next, she peeked in and realized that this was what the young master's room looked like. After all, she had always only seen what peeked behind him through the doorway. She saw a lot of books on the locker and was surprised by that. At this, she remembered what the maid had told her before. The girl had said that if the master was absent, it was all right to leave everything for tea on the table. In doing so, one should simply return to the kitchen with hot water. As a consequence, when the gentleman called, they would simply bring fresh boiling water to him. That is why the girl left under her nose with all the accessories for tea drinking and took a hot kettle. At the same time, she took it through a cloth because she felt that it was still quite hot. Then she ran happily to the exit, for she hoped not to meet Claude. She also thought that today she would probably be able to eat with Loretta. At the very moment when the protagonist came to the door and tried to open it, the door opened and there entered a young gentleman. The girl immediately looked at him and thought why all this was happening now. From surprise, the girl immediately lost her balance, and because of this, the kettle with hot water fell out of her hands. The young master noticed this and tried to move the girl away from the danger. At the same time, the boiling water spilled and was directed towards the girl's face, so the boy covered it with his own hand. The moment they were both on the ground, the girl thought this was bad. She also saw the wound on the gentleman's arm and remarked that she would get some cold water right away. The guy turned to Melody, but she didn't listen to him and ran right away. The girl also shouted that it was all her fault and she would go and get cold water right away. The guy at this time took the girl by the shoulder and stated to wait a second. In doing so, stated that she could have someone else do it instead. The protagonist wanted to remark that she was at fault, but suddenly the guy interrupted her and remarked for her to calm down and answer him one question first. Next, he inquired if she was hurt now. The girl answered nothing and just looked at him. It was clear from her facial expression. Claude smiled and remarked that this one was fine, and after that he asked if the girl could close her eyes and count to 100. He also noticed to close her ears as well. The heroine inquired if it was not just to count to 100. The interlocutor at this time said that panic will never solve anything. The girl wanted to notice something to him, but the guy declared that she should still start counting. At that, she had nothing to do but agree, and so she started to do it. In her head, she started counting from 1 and straight to 100, also closing her ears and eyes. The girl also thought that he must be calling the maids now. She wondered what they were talking about. At that moment when she was counting, the thoughts did not leave her head, and the girl thought, "Suddenly the Lord is badly hurt." She also remembered that moment in her life when she herself had run to the healer and been wounded. And she wondered if he could be as wounded as she had been at that time. After a while, she finished counting, and immediately worried, she looked up and opened her ears. As she did so, she looked forward, and there she saw a boy sitting there, who applied something to his wound. Claude saw that the girl was finally done and asked if she was feeling better. He was smiling as always, and the girl stated that she was, and she was sorry now. The interlocutor stated that once again she was deceiving him, because he could see it in her face. The protagonist thought that nothing could be done, for it was all her fault. She made a grave mistake, injuring the young gentleman. Suddenly, the guy noticed that he too should apologize, because he was in a hurry, because he wanted to have time to return before Miss Melody came. The girl inquired with surprise why he should do so. He immediately said that it was because Melody always came at that time. The girl noticed, but he never let her inside after all. The boy exhaled sadly and stated that he was sorry, wondering if he could forgive him. The girl looked at him in surprise, and the guy continued talking. Claude noticed that he knew he should apologize, but it was so hard to say it while looking into her eyes. He immediately lowered his eyes down and stated that he was just jealous because Loretta and Melody are very close. The heroine at this time was even more shocked. Claude inquired if she now thought he was acting like a child. After that, the interlocutor remarked that he simply had no choice, because this is the heredity of the Baldwin family. Their feelings make them lose control. Love blinds them and decides their sanity. The girl exhaled and declared that she understood it all. The guy immediately inquired if it was true. The heroine stated that it wasn't that she really understood it all to the fullest, but maybe. The interlocutor smiled again and remarked that she rarely seems to listen to what other people say. Also noticed that panicking really wouldn't solve anything. Then immediately stood up and remarked that the most important thing is to behave with dignity and keep a cool head, to act as if there was no problem at all. At this time, he touched her forehead with his finger. The protagonist was surprised by this behavior and asked if such behavior was acceptable in the capital. The interlocutor stated that of course it was. At the same time, he remarked that it seemed to him that Miss Melody had finally calmed down. The girl immediately smiled and noticed that it was so because she felt much better. She also noticed that it was all thanks to him alone. The interlocutor remarked that this was just fine. After that, he leaned very close to his interlocutor and asked then if she would apologize to him for that. After a while, the girl was sitting at a table and there was a huge pile of books beside her. At the same time, she was writing something down and was immersed in thought. The girl was thinking about what she was doing right now. In doing so, the girl remembered the moment with Claude, when he asked if she would apologize to him. Then the heroine asked him how he would even be able to laugh at her. The guy immediately addressed them with a tune, stating how his hand was after all. Immediately afterward, he smiled again as always and remarked that she should remember to come to him every day after lunch. At the same time, he asked that the girl do it as usual. Now the protagonist sat and watched the young master drinking tea. At this point, he saw the strange looks on himself and asked if something was wrong. Directly, the girl noticed that Claude's hand healed literally in 2 days. The heroine at this time sat behind a stack of papers and said with despair that she did not want to say anything. At that, the girl looked at his satisfied face and thought that he was really mean. At that moment, she remembered how the young gentleman had come to her with a stack of books and stated that it all needed to be rewritten. The girl also remarked, asking if it all really needed to be rewritten. They were all notes of the pranks of recently arrived members of the Duke's family. The girl thought that she would first rewrite it all, but she didn't understand what it all meant. After a while, the girl did finish her work and was already leaving to go back to her room. At the same time, she was tired and thought that the way was and fun, but still the young lord to her seemed mean. Still, it turns out that no matter how many times she asked him what she was doing all this for, and he never once answered. After all, it turns out, he smiled as always and declared that it was a secret. The girl now thought that she simply did not understand him. Suddenly, the girl herself did not notice the man in front of her, and immediately they ran into each other. After that, the girl apologized and looked to see who it was. That man looked at her with an evil look while saying nothing. After that, he looked at her with contempt and immediately turned around. The girl, in turn, realized that this person was one of the assistant elders. It turns out that they all looked at her and literally said to her face that she was the daughter of a slave trader. Suddenly, Melody decided that she really shouldn't be afraid. After all, she was the Duke's guest. It turns out that if he won't touch her, the Duke will, since she is his guest. She further looked at the departing guy and noticed that it is not all that important. What is more important is this factor that they hate not only her, but also Loretta. Also, based on the memories of the plot, the novella girl thought something event is about to happen. While the heroine was thinking about all this, then the maid came up to her and addressed Miss Melody. The girl turned in her direction, and the maid stated to her that his lordship was waiting for her. When the protagonist arrived at the Duke of this, he immediately showed her a box with the very bow that one of the elders had ripped off when he kidnapped her. The girl asked the Duke if this was from the elders. The man at that moment looked at her and answered nothing. The heroine immediately realized that something was wrong and apologized for the stupidest question. The Duke smiled and stated that he was not stupid at all. The girl immediately smiled back and stated that she got the bow. That's why she thanked him for the gift. Wayne looked at the girl's sleeve and noticed that it was all stained. He just wanted to ask what it was, but suddenly the girl noticed that she realized what she was talking about. She added that it seemed to be ink that had imprinted on his sleeve while he was describing, and she apologized for that. At that, the girl felt ashamed and wondered if he would think she was so dirty. The Duke thought he might not like the ink stains on the child's sleeve. At the same time, he realized that everything was indeed true, for these were not the conditions a child should grow up with. That's why she always apologizes for everything. At this moment, the man remembered the woman who was the girl's mother and how she treated the money and how she treated her own daughter. The man approached the girl and stroked her head while stating that she was doing a good job. In doing so, he thought he was already worried, as if based on her starting to apologize to him. He thought that the girl would apologize and say that she would soil his clothes. The girl thanked him for that, well, literally, with a questioning look. The man after that only smiled sweetly, then handed her a band and said that now in the mansion comes a lot of people, that's why she may need it. The heroine wondered if this bow was a sign of his favor to her. That is why she thanks him for it. The Duke stated that it was his duty after all. There is nothing wrong with it, and she doesn't even need to thank him. The heroine remarked that it is, after all, the least she can do, so she apologized for distracting him from his work. At the same time, she immediately stated that she promises not to lose the bow and to keep it safe. The interlocutor stated that she looked tired and asked if she was sleeping well. The girl smiled and stated that of course she did. During the night, the girl left her room and made her way through the corridors of the manor. As she did so, she thought that it was all really a lie, but she still had some things to stop. So, as she remembers from the plot, the novella, an unpleasant thing must happen soon. Such an event is the spoiling of dresses, which was organized by the helpers of the elders. That is why something that will break the heart of her dear friend Loretta may soon happen. That's why the girl thought she had to watch every night and let them just try to do it, she would scream. Suddenly, from behind, Claude approached the girl from behind and addressed her. The protagonist was immediately startled and screamed, further turned around and wondered if it was a young gentleman. At this time, the heroine thought that her plan was to first sneak up under the cover of night and then hide in the dark. After that, to keep an eye on a closet full of expensive things. And now she was a very suspicious person in the eyes of the young gentleman. That is why, frightened, she declared that she had not opened anything yet. The guy smiled and wondered if she had yet. The girl thought it was some kind of horror, for she was so scared that she even misspoke. Melody shouted to the young gentleman that it was not as he realized, for she had just misspoke now. The interlocutor remarked that he knew it very well himself. After all, why would Miss Melody steal something from the changing room? The heroine smiled and immediately inquired if he really thought so. The guy stated that for her information, he had noticed something about her. The girls wondered in amazement as to what he was talking about now. Plot went on to say that when he tells her to do something, she always complains a lot, but she does a flawless job. That's why if someone like Miss Melody wanted to steal something, they would at least target the Duke's ring. The girl immediately stated that she really wasn't a thief after all. The interlocutor stated for her to keep saying that and further. The girl wondered if he was laughing at her again, and he stated that it was a good point. The guy then turned around and asked what she was doing here. The protagonist immediately hesitated with an answer because she did not know what to say to him now. She thought that when she read this book of her past life, Loretta was the main character. Also, there was a villain who did not like Loretta, so he decided to destroy her dresses. It turns out that the girl is just there to stop him, but still, she can't tell her interlocutor everything, and so she went on to give a brief description of her fictional story. The guy listened to this and stated, "Does she mean to say that she happened to feel that the atmosphere had changed and happened to come closer to hear this one? And also, that she found out about their hacking plan completely by accident?" Looking at the girl's interlocutor, she thought that now he was going to say that this couldn't happen at all. Suddenly, Claude said that even if it was all true, the girl should not have gone alone such dangerous places. After all, it turns out that Melody is still a child. If it still felt something wrong, then it should immediately run away. And after that, tell an adult you can trust. He further inquired if the girl understood all of this. The heroine stated that of course she understood it. Claude remarked that this is great, and therefore asks her to go back to her place. The girl inquired, but how so since she is worried about the dress? The interlocutor remarked to Miss Youth that she had just told everything to a trusted adult. In doing so, he pointed his finger at himself. He also remarked that then he would decide everything and so the girl shouldn't worry about it. Melody immediately thought about how mature he was, since he was only 15 years old. At the same time, she did not understand why it was the interlocutor so glowing. But she thanked him for it. Claude remarked that it was he who should thank her, for it was for his sweet little sister. The young gentleman stated that it was getting late, and so it was time for the children to go to bed. The girl wanted to say something to him, but the guy interrupted her. At the same time, he inquired whether she simply could not fall asleep. After all, it seems to him he needs to revive the little one who is trying to help. At this time, the guy took off his outer garment and threw it over the girl. For this, she thanked him. The interlocutor took her by the hand and immediately called her to him. At the same time, as always, with a smile on his face, he said that he would help her to sleep soundly in just 10 minutes. The girl heard such words, was a little shocked. At that, she thought how else would he help her fall asleep in 10 minutes, and did he really want to knock her out? And with that, she pictured a picture of the guy apologizing to her for taking away her time with Loretta and knocking her out. Claude at this time stated that it was no big deal, because he goes to bed early too. The girl wondered if indeed he was going to put her to bed. After that, the protagonist together with her interlocutor went to the kitchen. The guy said that as soon as she gets it, she should immediately go under the blanket, and she will be able to fall asleep after that in 10 minutes. This is Claude's special recipe after all. After all, if the stomach becomes, the body becomes more sluggish, and the mood improves, and it is good for sleep. The heroine sipped this tea and was visited by thoughts of what she had only thought before. The tea was quite sweet, and she wondered if there was honey in it, because it tasted very good to her. The other person asked her if it was good for her. The girl said that it was very tasty. She then asked why he was wearing a suit at such a time and whether he had gone out. Claude stated that Daddy was busy, so he went to an event on his behalf. That's why he had just gotten home and hadn't even had a chance to change his clothes yet. He also stated that Melody shouldn't worry, because tomorrow morning he would tell Mr. Higgins to change the patrol time and increase the number of guards, of course. That was why the girl could sleep well. She was immediately thankful for that and thought it was nice of him to sort things out so quickly. After all, the guy is so calm and confident about it all. That's why she realized that after all, the title of adult he really deserved, even despite his young age of 15. After a while, Melody finished her drink and thanked Claude for it, stating that she would go then. She also wanted her cape back. To him at that stated she would keep it. The girl wondered if he was afraid she would catch cold. He went on to say that tomorrow she had better just take it to the laundry, and he would be more comfortable like this. Melody thought that's what it was about, because he just wanted her to take his stuff to the laundry. The guy also added that she shouldn't be late to see him tomorrow, because she still had a lot of things to rewrite. The heroine thought that he was really a mean face.